All right, well, let's start talking about it, man. Let's get into it. Jon Lund, there's not really much we can say. 6R80 king at this point. You guys did what probably nobody expected to happen, and what you guys almost seemed a little surprised when it did all work out, just pass after pass after pass. If you guys don't understand World Cup, you went out there with a 4-speed 6R80 and just drove through the entire class, it seemed like.
It seemed like it was a lot of work.
From my live feed view, I was like, man, they just got it easy. They're just driving that car. I'm sure your backside of things was a little bit more stressful.
Yeah. We didn't go to that event like intending to win, which is kind of odd to say. I think like sometimes you go to those big events and you're like, I want to be in the money. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not there, it's going to ruin my whole week. And we've kind of had that mentality a little bit with previous events we go to. And this time we changed the whole combo on the car except for the stock computer and the transmission. And
the two things that everybody would have changed first.
Right.
When you get a Mustang, what two things do you change? The stock computer and the and the trans?
Exactly.
Okay.
Backwards. Yeah, we just figured we want to make it more efficient because we knew we were leaving probably some horsepower on the table. So we changed the engine and the turbo system and the turbos. And it was probably a month out and the car had nothing in it. So we knew that if we could complete it and go, the car would be competitive just based on all the data we had on it. So it really depended on, though, making it to the track that week. Well, dyno, then track that week before. And we were pushing that line of, I think Saturday, we didn't even know if we were going or not. So we left Monday.
I saw you testing the week before, I think.
Friday, we were testing the Friday before.
You had to leave.
And out for blood.
And you had to leave like Sunday after that.
Yeah, we had to have everything packed Sunday, and we were going to leave Monday morning.
Yeah, for people that, because most people think, oh, Friday, you got a whole week until the race. But no, World Cup, you got to be there on like Tuesday morning to get a spot.
To get in line, yeah.
Yeah, just to get in line to hope to not be parked like in a different track somewhere.
Yeah.
Because they'll just drag you out into like the bushes and be like, this is all we got.
Right.
So I guess like the engine combo, those turbos, they work on other cars. That chassis works well. It was really just about getting like the trans and ECU to cooperate.
Well, so to back up a little bit, the last time we were at World Cup was in 2019. We have a blue 2015 Mustang. Yeah. We call it the Blue Goose.
Yeah, so we're talking about Gray Goose on the other one.
Yeah, the Gray Goose is our 2011 Mustang, and it still has a factory. It's not the stock geometry 3-link. It's a wishbone 3-link now with a 9-inch that Blacklist did last summer, and then we debuted it at FL2K, which is where you and I first met. FL2K.
That FL2K.
Yeah, last FL2K. Yep. So
up in Gainesville,
yeah. And the Blue Goose, though, was 2019 World Cup, and we took it to be in Street Fighter, and it had an IRS rear suspension on it, factory style.
Okay.
And up until that point, it had been 770s, and we had the same transmission combination in it. It was a 6R80 with the 4R200 hub, which basically removes the forward planet in the trans, and it turns it into technically a 3-speed with 1 overdrive. Factory has 4-speed with 2 overdrives. 5th and 6th are sub 1.
Just cruising gears.
Yeah. So because it removes that forward planet, both actually 3rd, 4th, and 5th all become 1-to-1 ratio when that forward planet is gone, and 6th still stays the same. So we figured out in the tuning how to make it basically do a 3/6 shift for cruising, and it would maintain that factory overdrive, and 3rd would be 1-to-1. So it's kind of like a Turbo 400 with a very poor first gear ratio still. So it's a 274 first gear.
So it's almost just like locking up when you're putting in 6th. It's almost like it's 1-to-1, probably just tighter.
Yeah.
So for cruising.
Yeah, and it's not like the most clean shift because there is no factory 3/6 like skip shift or anything. So, because it's got 2 off-going clutches and 2 oncoming. So if it doesn't do it right, it can tie up and kind of lock up a little bit.
So it'll lock up instead of just like free revving.
Yeah, like we had to be real soft with it. And I got some cars that have it that we tune, and you just kind of disclaim them that it's not going to be 100%. And they're all fine with it. And we set it up so they can do that shift on the fly. So most of them have paddles or select shift, and they can just hit the button. So it's kind of like OD on a switch.
Yeah.
So that way they're not constantly going into it and drive and it's upshifting, downshifting all the time, you know.
Yeah, because if you're like wide open throttle highway pull or something,
yeah,
and
right,
it grabs into 6, then you try to downshift back, it's probably going to be hard.
Or if you're in it and you lift and it does that upshift on decel, it's a little clunky. So we try to prevent that from happening, especially at the track.
What do you use in the rear gear of that thing with the first gear being so aggressive?
So we've gone from when we had the Blue Goose, we had a 340, but the car was 3,700 pounds, I think. And then we've progressively gotten lower with it. The Grey Goose has a 3.0 in it. So it's a very tall.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it's not very efficient at all.
Yeah.
It's basically like if we wanted to run it to the half mile, it would be really good for that.
And you can't really use an 8.8 at that point anyways, because your gear options become so difficult to really achieve the exact thing you want.
You could do a 308 and an 8.8.
Okay.
But with the weight of the car,
they start to get a little fragile once you get to that size on an 8.8.
We never broke a gear in it, but we started twisting axles. So
really?
Yeah, because we had a 331 in it when we had the 8.8, and it was all beefed up. Had a spool, everything, and we had the strange like Big Daddy 8.8s for the axles, and we'd make 2 passes and we'd pull one out and it was already moving 1 spline. So they're like, yeah, you're probably at the limit of torque and weight, because the car's 3,350.
Yeah.
So
it's
at that time,
race car weight.
Yeah, at that time it was like 3,400 probably.
I mean, my car's 3,200 pounds, so it's hard to get that much out of a street car, anyways.
It is.
I don't know how much like yours is still a street car in your mind, like.
I mean, if we had a bigger fuel cell in it, we could definitely drive it on like a drag and drive.
Is it on methanol?
It's on a 70% ethanol mix with 1 ethanol R, and then we have 30% M1 mixed with it. So we're playing with like a little bit of a mix.
Like do a little guessing game there.
I have like two cans, and it's marked, and it's fairly accurate. Yeah. So I tried to keep the math easy.
Gets a little scary sometimes when you're like playing around with that.
I mean, as long as it's like, I just checked the fuel trims. I mean, we were doing that at World Cup. We had 1 jug, and we had to do it maybe 2 or 3 times, and it was, a little mad science, but, plugs all look good.
Why not just go full methanol? I know most Coyote guys don't seem to do that. Like Brett and Jim are still on ethanol.
I think Brett's car is actually full.
Is it on methanol now?
Yeah.
For the longest time, it was.
He was doing a mix, I think, at first. Yeah. So they probably didn't dive into that a whole lot publicly, and that's fine that they didn't. But you could.
I think they've tried everything possible.
Yeah.
on that combination.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it seems like a lot of Coyote guys just stick with ethanol, maybe just for the simplicity.
It is. It's more like fuel system related. So when you have most of our customers are still running, factory electric fuel pump setup, and they have like a 4 innovation system in it. And it's just like a triple hat setup, and they have electric fuel pumps, and you can't really tax it more than what ethanol would be providing.
Well, and then the new stuff has the direct injection on top of that as well.
Right.
But that's probably a whole different conversation.
I mean, funny is I don't think the DI really does a whole lot in assisting fuel supply. So when you're at those power levels, so I have to blend a lot of it out to keep that side of the fuel system happy, and to be able to have fuel control. So I've done a lot of 1,500 plus horsepower Gen 3 Coyotes with DI, and they're only running sub 20% direct injection. So, and at that point, I don't even know if it's doing a whole lot. So I've actually, I got tired of dealing with guys having issues with the DI injectors. They'd fire it up, they'd be leaking. Sometimes they don't leak. It's opposite. They don't spray at all. and it causes all sorts of issues. You get, melting pistons, whatever. And I wanted to do a DI delete, so I figured out how to do it with the factory computer, and then somebody made a DI delete. I forget the name of the company. It's like Budget Built Racing.
Like where you actually like plug the...
Yeah, he has these
out.
like billet plugs, and they're all sealed. And then he has a little plate that he puts over the high pressure pump, and you can actually put a sensor in it if you wanted to. Actually, I think Billet Pro Shop makes that, and you can monitor crankcase pressure if you wanted to.
Oh, that's a pretty convenient spot to get it from, I guess.
You can actually, the high pressure pump system has its own rail pressure sensor. I've not tested it yet, but I'm pretty sure you can go change the transfer function in the tune, and because it's non-functional anymore, you could turn that sensor in whatever you want. So you could just monitor boost, you can monitor crankcase, all on the factory data log.
It's interesting you would turn that off. I mean, I've seen such good results from the direct injection stuff, able to like, because it kind of aids, I guess, in compression a little bit in a weird way.
I think when it's pure DI, there's the benefits, but in order to have that, you got to have a lot of fuel pump, and your pressure has to be high from your fuel pump. You have to have bigger injectors, and that market gets real expensive. So I think pump plus those DI injectors is way more than what you'd spend on a port injection
like the
system.
diesel world.
Probably, yeah.
Like...
Or you got to run two pumps. So and then I was talking to a few other guys that, like Audis and the Lamborghinis, they come with DI on the V10s, I believe.
Yeah.
And they're all deleting them. So, and they're deleting them because at the big power levels, they were seeing issues with it, melting the tips of the injectors off, and because they weren't able to spray enough fuel out of them to keep them, cool. You can't just shut it off and leave the injector in the cylinder because the combustion temperatures are so high. It always has to be spraying something out of it.
I've heard of people in the GM world do that. They're like, yeah, we just had them off and then we turned it back on and they worked.
Yeah, that's not a smart idea.
I can't imagine that being a long-term solution.
Yeah.
Well, we are talking about GM guys,
Yeah.
I have GM products. I understand how it is. It's a little different.
Yeah.
I feel like the multicam stuff takes a little bit different of a finesse.
All the Coyote 4-cam.
And even like Audi stuff is like, there's a little bit more of like a finesse when you're talking about the variable cam timings and stuff like that, where Chevy guys is just like, you kind of slap it in, you line up a couple dots and you're good.
Yeah, it's like sledgehammer racing versus, fine tuning racing.
But it's really nice because you can just like completely scatter a LS and have another one back together fairly quickly, where I watch these guys put Coyote cylinder heads on and it's like,
it's a process.
It's like a full day event.
It is. Yeah. Usually you can't do it with the engine in the car, so strut tires get in the way, and
then you got to heat it up, take the cams back out, torque them down again. You'll go with that process a few times, and I'm like, it seems like a lot.
Yeah,
I think I'll just.
We've been there.
Yeah, you're probably all in that.
Yeah,
now because you're making 2,600 horsepower, probably what, 3,000 almost.
We're probably in the 2,400 at the crank range. I'm guessing. We didn't on the dyno. We didn't put it at that boost level.
Well, what mile an hour did the car go? What, 206?
209.
209?
Yeah, at 33.
33.
It was 3370 after that pass. So
I mean, you could probably tell in the data how much fuel flow.
Because it has a MAF, and most guys aren't running a MAF. It shows airflow. It's said 260 pounds per minute.
What did the turbo kit builder, Matt, or whoever built it, say when you were like, yeah, it needs a MAF right here?
It was, I don't know if you've heard of Ryan Eckert. He helps Joe at FFRE with some welding stuff when they need it. He's a really good fabricator. And Joe recommended him to us when we started using FFRE for the engine because he's local.
Yeah.
And we said, we need somebody to come to the shop and just follow what we want. So we were more the engineers on where we wanted stuff, and he was the guy to say, yeah, I can do that, or no, this will be better. And he was cool with everything. He understood why we had to run a MAF, which was nice because sometimes there's fabricators that are like pure standalone, and they're like, why don't you just go to a MAP sensor and a standalone? And like, well, this is what we're doing. So
well, yeah, it's tough too because I've been to fabricators where they won't do it your way because they're putting their name on it.
Right.
which I get. It took a little while for me to understand that, but if they're putting their name on something, if it's coming out of their shop, it's done their way, and you don't really get a say on that.
Right.
And I get the idea of wanting to engineer it yourself and basically just bring in a welding guy that can kind of just like put these tubes here, weld it all together. That definitely it makes it nice.
Yeah, it's kind of like having your own personal fabricator, even though he's not like working for us. But it also allowed us to like drum up that relationship with him, and he's very proud of all the work that he did. He didn't just do the turbo system. He did some other stuff for us for like the front suspension had to change in order for certain things to fit. And we actually have an odd front suspension on it. It's still an S197 Mustang K member, but it's got basically a Fox body control arm setup on it, which usually you have to go to a Racecraft K. And we couldn't make that work with our headers without modifying too much. So we just modified the UPR-K member that we have on there, and it all works. So it's unique. When you look under, you're like, that's not S197, that's not Fox body, you know.
It's probably like a little bit more like my new Edge then, I guess.
Yeah.
It's all UPR stuff on that deal too, UPR control arms and stuff, and then
it actually is very similar to S550. So when you put an S550 manual rack on it, the way that the toe arms are positioned, they kind of go forward a little bit. And we're a little worried, like, is it going to cause issues with bump steer going down the track? Because we're not, you know, chassis guys. Obviously, we're tuners, but we're smart. So we just measured a lot. And when we got to that Friday before we went to World Cup, main concern wasn't really anything else with the car. It's like, we know the trans will live as long as it wants to. We know the engine is strong because it's making tons of horsepower. Is it going to go straight? So it was more like, let's just see if it goes straight. Went straight, so we got that out of the way. And then he went a little faster, and it was still going straight. And then we had a little bit of a trans hiccup, but that was more my fault than anything before we left for World Cup.
Yeah. So you're worried about the front end, actually, on that deal instead of the rear, because I guess you already knew that the rear was pretty dialed from Matt, who builds race cars all the time. And I get that you guys aren't like race car guys, really. You know, you probably tune like 98%.
Yeah.
I don't know if you use the word street car.
Yeah, it's more normal person car.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of definition you'd rather use on that.
Right. They're basically street cars because they could be driven on the road for an extended period because they all have big fuel tanks in them, and we really focus stock style, and we focus on drivability because they still have variable cam timing. Most of them do, and those customers want that docile Coyote engine that can go from, you know, mild to wild in a matter of a few seconds. So that's our biggest customer. Our car is more like, it's funny you say we're not really race car guys. We've been told that like years ago, like we're just tuners, we're testing tuners, and it was actually why we started like pushing the Blue Goose really hard, because we just were like, you know what, we don't really race, we should, because it helps promote. The biggest problem was time. It wasn't then an effort.
Yeah.
But I think people were harping on us because they didn't think we had the ability to. And then we kind of showed up and just started like stretching its legs. And that's why I went to World Cup that one year, did a big wheelie, car came down, broke a bunch of stuff. And then that car kind of got put in a corner, and we just moved everything back over to the Grey Goose. And we've just been pushing it ever since.
Yeah, and I don't mean that as like a dig.
No, I know.
You got, like, I don't mean like, oh,
No.
You're not a race car guy. I just mean like when you look at, like, I go to the track all the time, and you kind of pay attention to like the race car tuners that they don't care about the startup tune. They don't care about drivability up to the lanes. Wide open throttle is all that needs to happen.
Right.
And that's like a different tuner.
Right.
Completely.
We call them watt tuners.
Watt tuners, yeah. And they're not taking anything away from those guys either, because they do really well.
They do.
But there's just like, people don't realize with their goals, you have to pick your tuner as well.
Right.
And I get why you guys would want to step into the race car world a lot more.
It gives us like range because we're still tuning 450 horse NA cars like daily. You know.
Yeah, can you stop doing that? Can you tell them to use more mufflers maybe or something? Can that be like on your checklist that you send out to people? Like, cannot have a Corsa Extreme exhaust.
yeah.
If you're tuning a Coyote, please.
Every time we see that mod list come in, we roll our eyes, and it's like, just please stop.
My wife never has commented on a loud car ever. Yesterday, we're driving back from getting food, and this Mustang comes by us, brand new Mustang, and I think the only mod was just cut off the exhaust, and it was horrendous.
Yeah.
And she's like getting on me because I'm making fun of it. She's like, you've had loud cars before too. I'm like, it's not the same. Even the Mustang guys agree.
Yeah.
It's not the same. Like a Coyote no exhaust is the wildest, most extreme sound ever. So
it can sound exotic when it wants to. You just have to set it up right. Like, I think blower Coyotes sound pretty good.
Yeah.
Turbo Coyotes sound really awesome, but when they're naturally aspirated, unless they're at 8,500 RPM, it's just raspy. So it's a very raspy engine.
Even the turbo guys that have exit exhaust on both sides is tough too, because you're only ever on one side.
Yeah.
So you're kind of just hearing like half an engine.
Yeah.
Just like make this like weird like 4-cylinder-ish sound, and you're like, what the heck is going on there?
Single turbo Coyotes sound pretty interesting.
That's
too.
true. You tune a couple of those from
a
few of my buddies that have, I think it's just Christian now that I know that has the single turbo.
Yeah, he's the only one left with a single turbo.
Moretti ditched that world.
All the MSR guys. Yeah.
But that I like seeing the single turbo. I just know that they're tapped out, which is a weird thing.
They got to run a bigger turbo to get more out of it, but then you run into like all your short track issues because of how big the turbo is.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's another thing like that we've been really wanting to test on the car is variable cam timing. A lot of our guys early on with the Coyote, especially Gen 1, when we were still limited on what we could do in terms of control and what we knew. It was more about what you know. Like, now we know so much more than we did a decade ago. Mm-hmm. But they would delete the VCT, lock the cams out. Unless it's in like a really good spot and you got the right turbo combination, your spool time is always going to be slower than what it could be if you had variable cam timing. So you got to hit it with dump valves. You got to do all this fancy stuff. And that discourages some guys from going certain routes. So we wanted to give people a little bit more confidence in like, you can do VCT at extreme horsepower levels and not compromise certain things. Like, because if you keep VCT, you maintain drivability. Like the Grey Goose idles the way it does because I have a ghost cam on it. I don't have, as stupid as it sounds, I have it chopping at idle on purpose.
Yeah.
More from a functional standpoint too, because it's got big injectors and the low vacuum helps fuel control. But it sounds awesome. Yeah. So if I could make that thing idle 800 RPM if I wanted to, and it would purr like a kitten. But that's what I wanted to be able to do, is to show off that ability to do that.
And that's reliable at that power level. That's an interesting thing too, because they're stock cams, I would imagine.
They're a factory. They're not a factory Ford. I guess they are factory Ford. They come in a Predator GT500 and the same grinds in a GT350, just different firing order.
Stock. Do you have to weld the lobes on those still?
No, we didn't touch any of it. I think the newer sticks are a little bit stronger on the Gen 2 Plus stuff, and it's a Gen 2 based control system, so it's got the Gen 2 reluctors on the back. And
for people that don't realize, you have to weld the cam lobes on
I think that was
Coyotes.
I think it was a Gen 1 cam.
Gen 1.
Yeah.
You had to weld the lobes because they were just pressed on.
Yeah.
And they would spin.
Yeah.
I've seen that a few times where they spin and throw off people without them realizing that the cam lobe just spun on it and it ruined one cylinder's timing.
Yeah, I've had a lot of guys with Gen 2, Gen 3, and we pushed extreme RPMs, lots of horsepower, and we've not had it locked and VCT, and they've not had any spun lobe issues. So
it's just crazy that that's reliable at that power level, though.
Yeah.
Because it's oil actuated, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like an oil pressure actuated type of thing. That's how it is on my car.
Yeah, so it's...
On the 2J, it's still VVTi.
Yeah, we're still learning on it a little bit because it's stuff that like a lot of guys don't go into because they like I said, they just engine builders even, they just delete them. And it maybe because they don't want to take the time to understand it, or they just think, oh, that looks like it's going to fail because it says Ford on it, and it's stamped and, not good material.
Well, a lot of ECUs probably don't have any,
that's a big one.
Real good control on that either.
Yeah, I think the first aftermarket controller was a AEM for the Coyote, and it didn't have very good control. And then Holley tried it. I still don't think they have good VCT control.
Doesn't surprise me.
Motec is probably the only one that has the best. And I've had experience with I was doing a little 6R80 feedback testing for Motec, and we put it on. We have a factory, a mostly stock 15 GT that we just use for testing whatever, and we put it in that, and it controls the cams really good. If we go to a standalone in it in the near future, which it'll probably happen, just depends on what pushes me to that point. It's going to get a Motec, so there's no question on that.
Yeah, the M150 deal, right?
M150, whatever we need in order to do what we need.
I've seen awesome results from those. The built-in traction control stuff is
their TC stuff is
unreal.
Great. Yeah.
It works so well. It's so subtle once you have that thing dialed in, and I've seen it control the trans, and you could put 12 sensors on the trans too, and know every single gear and every single what every pressure is doing, which is probably nice on a data standpoint.
Yeah,
I'm a simpleton. If I put too much data in front of me, I start to get a little. That's what I tell myself. But
I was talking to Garrett at World Cup, and I asked him how everything's looking on his on the data. And he goes, I don't look at those sensors.
on which car? The Coyote car?
All of them. I think he calls them sad sensors is what he called them.
That's a good way to look at it.
Because sometimes they make you sad.
And especially if you're a sensor like a crankcase pressure. You've been running your car all year, and then you decide to put a crankcase pressure on there. Suddenly you're going to be upset. You're not going to be happy. It's like doing a compression test.
Yeah.
You're never going to be stoked after a compression test.
Yeah.
For the most part. You're always going to look, and it's always going to, you race a motor hard. It's always going to look a little not ideal.
It's it's high anxiety for a brief moment.
Yeah. You don't want to look at that. And we both use Fast Forward Joe.
Yeah.
So then he ends up getting the call, and he's just like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Bring it in.
We collect it because we're obviously testing things for him at the same time. So it's I have to look at the SAD sensors, but I'm a data guy, obviously. So I comb through everything. I make notes, and I just that's how my brain functions. So sometimes I don't make notes. I just have a good enough memory to remember.
Well, and you work with a million different cars, so it's not
patterns.
Yeah. Like somebody like me who works on one car, I just get caught up in my own one car data, and I don't have really much to compare it to. I don't really have any previous I can look at this other car. I'll send it to my tuner, and he can usually calm me down a little bit.
To tell you what to replace or not replace.
Get the spiral to stop.
Yeah.
Do you have any way to measure the stretch on the chains?
If there is, it's all Joe. So
I didn't know if you monitored that.
No, we don't have any sensors for that, I don't think.
Because I've seen that some ECUs, like the Motecs, they monitor.
Yeah, I don't know
stretch on chains.
I don't know if Brett's monitoring that or not on his.
I think Jim was there when they first changed the cars over.
Oh, okay.
So they were able to tell if the service life was about there.
There is,
which is a pretty cool way to know.
Yeah, there is. It's funny you say that. The GT350s have. I've seen it in the OEM calibration. They have a oil chain. They have a chain life, some kind of logic, and I'll have to look at it, and I'll tell you about it later because I haven't really looked at it close enough. But it's based on something with oil, and I'm not sure what they're doing because there's no sensors.
Yeah.
So how are they inferring chain life off of what's going on if there's no sensor? So
you would have to know almost both cams exactly where they lie when they stop, right? Because if they're top dead center when you set them,
right,
and then they're a little bit different the next time it's sitting there, and then they're a little bit more.
You can there's cam sensors for all four. And if that's part of the logic, I'll have to go look and see.
I would imagine.
I would assume it has to do something with that. But you'd also have to go, is it something going on with the tensioners? So, because I've seen issues with tensioners collapsing, causing issues, and it's not really a chain issue. It's more of a tensioner failing. So if they added other sensors, that would be neat to be able to do. Otherwise, it's when it comes apart, hey, Joe, does this still look okay?
Well, once you break a chain, it's pretty catastrophic.
Yeah, and
because they're interference engines, right? Like if you break a chain, it's going to hit the valves.
Yeah. You almost can't prevent what's going to happen if you break a chain. But
well, some engines, they break and non-interference, and the valves aren't going to hit the piston.
Right.
But race engines, you're probably pushing that valve down pretty far.
Yeah, and you may get lucky where you don't cause a lot of damage, but almost always it does. We've not, knock on wood, we haven't broken a chain ever in one of our Coyote engines. And we were breaking input shafts on the 6R last year, actually beginning of this year too. We didn't have a billet one made, and one of our engines went to 10,700 RPM when it broke because it neutrals.
Yeah.
And it didn't break a chain. Wow. It broke like 4 rockers and sent a lifter out into the bottom of the motor.
Okay.
That was fun. It still ran. We pulled in the trailer. We didn't know. It wasn't running that good, but we got real lucky with that. But that engine we couldn't use anymore because it actually it hit so hard it cracked part of the head where it popped one of the lifters out. So we've not even disassembled that motor. We're like, we'll give that one to Joe at some point.
Yep.
He didn't build that one, but we'll say, you want something cool to look at?
Take the parts off it.
Yeah.
Did it damage the converter at all? I would imagine that kind of like sudden, because sometimes once you break a gear and free rev an engine, the converter will just like hate that.
Yeah, it actually didn't. We couldn't get the input shaft out, so we had to send it off to Circle D to, cut it open and pull it out. But they said everything looked fine in it. So I think we have 2 converters in rotation, and they're the same. So we'll just, if we're changing something in the trans because something went through it, we'll swap to a fresh converter. Is it not
a bolt-together converter?
No, it's a one-piece. Yeah, we're pretty psycho.
Yeah. What's the concept on that, though? Is it just lighter, or is it just because it's cheap and easy? And
we've had that converter for like 4 or 5 years, and it just works really well for what we do. We've tried like all sorts of different like stators, and that's the one we always come back to. And that the stator experimentation is literally obviously not taking the converter apart. We're swapping to a different converter because they didn't have a bolt together at the time. We didn't get a bolt together to test until last year, and the one we tried was at the beginning of this year in January, where we went 7.0 and a 7.1. I think you may have been at the track that day. I can't remember.
I did. I was there. Yeah. I saw the 7.0 because I was biting my nails. I was like,
yeah. And that's when you said when you want to come on the show, and I told you when we run 6s.
Yes.
And then you've been waiting patiently since.
I know. I was like, all right, you went 6s. You said you were going to come on and boast about your 6-second freaking 6R80, and I was like, I'm all in because I love hearing about that. I was actually thinking. Well, first off, that 7.0 really bummed me out a little bit because anytime anybody's that close, I'm like, and I think you hurt something on it or something because you didn't make a backup pass after.
That in January?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a converter. We were testing a different stator, and it worked really well in the front half, but when it got into high gear, because we have that 3.0 rear gear, we're loading the crap out of the trans and the converter, and there's really nothing you can do about it because of the gearing. So it's 1-to-1 with the 3.0 rear gear at 3,300 pounds. So it had 16 or 17% converter slip. Something wasn't happy with the converter. It got hot. Fluid got really hot. And we were like, it's not going to 6 today without damaging something bad. So that wasn't really a 6R problem. That was more of a configuration issue. And we didn't put the bolt together back in. Actually, we tried it one more time, but with the same stator as our weld together, and it wasn't spooling the same. Everything inside the converter is exactly the same. It's just a bolt together, and it was down like half a second versus the.
Oh wow, that's a significant change.
Yeah, and so something seemed wrong inside of it. So we're like, we'll hold, because we were testing stuff for Circle D. We think maybe like a thrust problem, and it was causing drag. So we put the one piece in, and I think we went back out like in March before we went to TX2K, and it broke the input shaft in like 2 passes, and it was on its way to another 7.0 or a 6.9. So at that point, we had to wait because there's no solution. And I was ready to put a Turbo 400 in it then, and then our friends in Australia, Blue Streak Performance, they make some hard parts in the trans, all billet. Daniel Otway said, I have an input shaft I've been working on. I'll send it over to you. So we waited a few weeks, and he actually sent us 2 and put it in, went back out in April, and it did 112, 160 foot, which is like the best it's done. I was playing with some stuff with launch, and fuel sloshed in the tank, and it went lean, and it went like a 7.2. And then we tried to go again. At this point, we had to switch engines. I forgot to say that. When it broke that last input shaft, we had to switch to our other engine. And the other engine's not as efficient, something with the heads. So that engine at the track did something super strange. We're talking about cams. The cams all advanced 10 degrees out of nowhere. Fired the engine up, they're all advanced. Joe still we haven't taken that one to him to diagnose, but
so he's got just a bunch of list of engines that he's going to have to figure out.
Yeah, all these Lund engines that are just being super goofy. We had that issue once before on that motor, and it has they're called perfect circle gears for the timing components. So we take the OEM off and put the perfect circle on. I think it may have something to do with that. Ford did non-perfect circle for a reason, probably mostly related to VCT and how things are spinning and control.
That's weird. So they're like oval shaped,
slightly,
just like a little oblate.
Yeah, but I think it's more for how the chains move. I don't think it's all related to VCT. So because we went back to OEM on the current motor, I think it's got all GT350 stuff except for the chains. They're all upgraded, and then the guides are whatever Joe supplied. And otherwise, it's got intake-only VCT now, and the exhaust it's locked, but it's got the factory gears. So
are you able to just call the dealership and order all this stuff pretty much?
Mostly,
is that
it's got factory rockers, factory lifters. They're all the GT350 stuff because it's now 350 heads in it, and it's slightly different than the regular Coyote. Because it's a Coyote variant. And people argue about that.
Variant, I know. I've heard that one before.
Yeah. But
Isn't it funny that the GT350 is pretty bad engine, but then you guys use all this stuff off of it?
Yeah, I mean, the top side of it's awesome. Yeah. I tell guys all the time, like the best NA engine that they came out with was probably the 350. It just probably needed a cross-plane crank and some oiling stuff fixed. The later ones, the 1920s, they put some Shelby stuff or GT500 stuff in them, and I'm pretty sure they had 4-layer head gaskets, and the blocks were Predator blocks, so they had the deeper head bolts. And so 1920 GT350, they're pretty baller motors.
Yeah.
Like you could, take one pretty far.
Make some power. Do you think that kind of just happened that they ended up with the Predator block because like it was one of those deals where they switched over like production of blocks, and they were like, well, we're not making the Coyote at this moment, so just we got the Predator blocks, I guess.
Yeah.
I've seen that with GM where they're like, well, we already made X amount of LS1 cars and we already switched over to LS6, and they kind of just like some freak factory stuff ends up happening.
Yeah.
And that's what Justin Young was telling me about too. He's like, the mod motor stuff, you got to get 50 different things from 10 different places, and Lincoln Town Car and Navigator this, and I was like, seems like a lot.
Yeah, the Coyote stuff's a little bit more, concise. So it's, I like everything on the top side of the 350 engine. The flat plane crank isn't bad. The Voodoo block, I think, has issues after a certain power level, something with the casting. I don't remember what power level it is, sub 1800 probably.
It's not terrible.
It's not terrible. It's
a pretty healthy amount of power. It's not like we're talking 800 horsepower here.
Right. Before that, we were running just regular old style Coyote, like Gen 1 Coyote blocks. I think one of our engines actually was a Gen 2, which doesn't have the deeper head bolts. So it was machined at some point through one of the mini engine builders we used to deeper, which is tricky because sometimes you can do it wrong and then it weakens the block in that area and then they don't withstand, like the harmonics will end up cracking at some point. But we never had a problem.
And the GT350 harmonics are crazy. That's why they have all kinds of weights and stupid things on those motors.
And that could be another reason why they changed the block in the 1920s to the Predator block, because it was better casting. And so far, that's the best block, obviously, because we're making crazy horsepower. Brett's making crazy, and there's other guys that have a similar setup, and the blocks are proving to be very strong.
Technically, I haven't seen that block's limit.
Right.
Like, we still haven't seen the Predator block's peak of power. I've seen the billet block one.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the Predator block one yet.
Well, that billet block, I think, I mean, anything can happen.
Of course. You can break a motor in 2 clicks of a button if you wanted.
Yeah, like either there was something that failed mechanically to cause something to seize, to eject, and it just found the path of least resistance, or something happened in the cylinder from fueling or lack of or whatever. Too much fuel could hydrolock it, and it could do the same thing and cause that one lockup event, and then boom, it ejects it. Either break the crank or do both.
It's not right to blame the block when anything could have happened. Injector failure could have gotten it. Anything. Yeah. A million things could have went wrong.
I know.
But it's crazy that we haven't seen the factory block.
Right. You're right.
I mean, make it to its end yet. I mean, you guys probably look at that and know, like, oh man, we got a lot left in this thing if we just kind of keep throwing more power at it. But your limiting factor is probably in between the rear end and the crank there.
We thought it was. I mean, it's either that or the computer. I'm still trying to figure out what's going to come first. So back to the whole thing with changing everything. In April, we had that problem, and I told my dad, I'm like, actually at TX2K, I told him, after looking at a bunch of the exotics
and your dad drives the car. We never said that.
My dad drives the car.
He drives the car.
He drives the car. He wrenches on the car. We don't have a mechanic at the shop, so he is I nickname him the mechanic.
Just out of necessity.
Yeah, technically, I mean, when we're at the track, I'm probably more crew chief and tuner at the same time. But we don't have labels, but I'm primary laptop guy and direction guy, and he's the nuts and bolts guy. But he, as a pilot, he was in the Army for a number of years, flew medevac and Desert Storm, a helicopter pilot.
Yeah,
he flies airplanes too. He did corporate America, basically glorified limousine driver, flying people around in helicopters. He never was part of the wrench side of the helicopter, but as a pilot, you still have to know pretty much everything about the aircraft. And because he's a gearhead, he got along well with all the mechanics. So when he had to drop the aircraft off, he'd bro out with them, look at stuff. He understands how everything works, versus just dropping off, leaving, and going to get a steak dinner somewhere.
Yeah, tell me when it's done.
Right. He always had a relationship with the mechanics. And for as long as I've, been alive, I've always seen him in the shop or garage on a dirt floor or whatever, wrenching on a Mustang. So there's a picture of me somewhere. I'm holding a wrench and I'm in a diaper and there's some Mustang behind me. I was always around him doing that. So it's just his passion. So it's frustrating sometimes for him because he is by himself, but at the same time, I know that he enjoys it because he's in control of literally everything on the vehicle.
Yeah.
So he takes it personally when something's not going right, but he also takes pride when it does go right. So when he when we are making passes in the car, every time it completes a pass and nothing's on fire, nothing's broken, he's a happy camper, you know. And I think he prefers to drive it because it's his baby. He obviously, you know, I want to drive it, but at the same time, I have kids, so it's like trying to balance that whole, like, you know, sending me down the track in a really fast car, and
200 plus miles an hour at 3,300 pounds.
Better for grandpa to do it.
Yeah, let him enjoy it.
Yeah. So, but he loves it because he's a pilot. So he gets in, and the more switches I can give him to flip, he loves flipping them, or buttons to press.
Yeah.
So he always asks me, like, how much is on the scramble? Because he just loves to hit that big red button. So.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to have a scramble button. I would hit it as soon as possible. Anyway, we're all in on my deal, but
he takes pride in all that. And then we at Texas 2K, we saw all these other cars, and they had, you know, low mount twin turbo setups. Like, I mean, Brett's obviously is a similar turbo system. Yeah. Ours is air to water. His is air to air. And the reason I went to air to water is I saw all these GTRs with air to water, more specifically that one that went like, what did it go, 230 something in whatever roll race they were doing.
Yeah, I think it was one of the T1 cars maybe.
Yeah. And it makes 3,000 horsepower. So I hit up Tony.
4.1 liter.
Yeah, I hit up Tony, and I'm like, does that have factory coil packs on it? He's like, yeah, they're the, you know, R35 factory Japanese coil packs. And I'm like, well, are you doing it because it's on M1, pure methanol, air to water, and a lot of guys don't do that.
Not on stock ECU.
Right, but I'm like...
So he could run anything, really.
He could, and I'm like, so are you doing it because you don't have to run it as rich in order to keep the engine happy? And he's like, yeah, we run the air to water, and I don't have to run it as fat, so therefore I can get away with less coil. Because a lot of guys, when they go pure M1, no intercooler, they got to run them really fat, and you got to end up upgrading the ignition. Mm-hmm. So it's not just putting a standalone in it and putting smart coils on it. Sometimes you got to go beyond those, and you got to run like a CDI system.
Yeah, like the big block guys run like some pretty serious coil setups.
Right. So he's running factory coils. Now they generate more energy than a Ford coil does. We have Predator coils on ours, which are a little bit more than a GT coil, still factory part. And I don't know where the limit is. I don't know. So I'm running it pretty, not super fat, but fatter than I would normally on an ethanol-based Coyote. And with methanol, we're just running methanol right now to play with it, because that's what we do, and to help with EGTs. So that's something else a lot of guys don't really monitor. These, even like sub 2,000 horse, they're not monitoring EGTs, and they crack exhaust, and, you know, they can hurt something in the head. So we know like where we're at, and I'll probably keep adding more methanol, and then we may approach a limit of the coil packs. I don't really know yet.
So when you say limit, you're talking about the spark plug unable to burn the fuel. Correct. Because it can't make enough spark. It's just washing out the spark plug.
But it's more about like what target lambda you're running. Yeah. So if you're like a methanol guy, pure M1, non-intercooled, they're running those things at like 0.5 something lambda. Mm-hmm. Regularly on ethanol, you're in the high 0.7s usually, or like a 0.80. We're down in the low 0.7s. I believe that some of those GTRs are probably in the high 0.6s. So I've had a factory coil down to high 0.6, not at this power, but Roush does it, OEM, on the pump gas stuff, probably for emissions related things and keeping the cats alive. Yeah. But the coils work fine. Now, will they work fine at, you know, that cylinder pressure? I don't know. I'm willing to find out.
That's why you see top fuel cars have like two massive magnetos on them, because they're just garden hose into each cylinder.
Yeah, and they're running nitro meth, and
which is highly aerated, so it's probably harder to light.
Right.
Just because of more science than I understand. But
but we're monitoring, like being able to monitor EGTs tells us if combustion is happening properly, because usually you can see if a plug's getting ready to take a dump, or it did take a dump, and you know you got to change it. So we're able to see all that data after a pass, and every pass Actually, I think I started like richening it a little bit as we progressed because I knew it wouldn't hurt. I just wanted to like keep the, pushing the EGTs down. And we didn't have issues. The plugs always came out looking really good. And I just want to keep like adding more and see how far I can push it. I think that we could run pure methanol on factory coils on a factory ECU if we have enough injector.
Just as Ford intended.
Right.
Can you do individual cylinder stuff on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so if one cylinder seems a little questionable, you can change it.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to tune off EGTs sometimes, but you can make like a rough guesstimate. It would be better if you had individual air fuel in each primary, but that's a lot of work to.
It's a lot of ECU.
We could
read 8 different.
We can
AFRs.
monitor it on like a standalone logging box, but there's not like a big benefit unless you're doing that on a dyno. I think like Ford does all their testing like that, everything hooked up because they have multiple control systems and they're on an engine dyno and they like hammer the engine for hours and they're able to monitor all that. Plus, they probably have individual sensors inside each runner for monitoring flow or whatever, temperature.
There's probably a ton of sensors that they use that
most
people don't get.
They put in a computer and it spits out something. They put it back and they go and run it again. And
How many different modules are in that car then? Because I saw one in-car photo and it looked like there was a lot of things. That were all wired together.
Yeah, most of it has to do with that little dash, the switch panel that we have in there. I forget the company that did it. I think it was Race Wires or something. But we have that dash mostly for convenience. It's a lot easier to work on the car. It's not really a weight thing. It is light, but it's like being able to pull the dash out to work on the electronics on the car is 10 times easier than doing with factory.
I don't see any need to beat your chest about a factory dash that some people like to do. Some people love to beat their chest about the stupidest things in racing, and I can't stand that. It's about anything. Like, I still got TPMS in my car. It's like, great. It's really cool.
Right. Yeah,
but I don't see any. Especially my car is like an F body from 99.
Yeah.
People are like, it doesn't have a factory dash. I'm like, have you ever seen a 99 F body dash? It's 900 pieces at that point. But that's aside the point.
So it's mostly that and related to the fuse box. Like everything is under there for a control pack. Like Ford has what they call a control pack ECU, and it's a stripped down wiring harness, and then their ECU with their strategy on it that basically is set up for a swap vehicle. So because this was a Gen 1 car, it originally had a Gen 1 Coyote ECU in it, and the Gen 2 ECU can control the 6R a little better. It's all output shaft speed based for the shifting versus using mile per hour. So it's more accurate. So if we change rear gear and tire size, it's not going to affect the output shaft speed. It's always the same. So, and it's quicker. And the PCM can go to, I don't know what RPM it can go, probably 12, 15,000 RPM. I won't ever find out.
You never know.
Maybe in 5 years, we'll see.
Maybe accidentally.
Yeah, they're like little Honda motors at this point. But it controls everything better. It's still MAF based. We could run a truck ECU, which is MAP. The Gen 2 Plus trucks are all speed density. Not the traditional speed density. It's Ford's, discombobulated way of doing it.
What they call speed density.
Yeah, I can make it all work. We haven't done it because we just haven't seen, what's the benefit of going to speed density except for just changing pipes. Like you can change how you route and package the turbo system.
Yeah, if everything's, all the sensors are reliable that you have now, I could see if you're just cooking MAF sensors.
If we were doing non-intercooled, for sure, you can't run a MAF because it'll melt it. So, but because we're intercooled and how many bricks we have stacked in that intercooler, the MAF signal is probably the cleanest MAF signal I've seen on any Ford MAF that I've tuned in over a decade. Like idle, you would think it'd be super choppy. It's flat as a board. So when I saw that and what it does at wide open throttle, it's very sensitive and it follows the boost curve perfectly. So usually you can get it skewed, like you can have temperature rising in that pipe, and which airflow is going to change when your temperature's up, especially on air-to-air stuff.
Yeah.
And it'll skew your MAF reading.
Well, because it's just reading a voltage, really, right? It's
It's frequency based on the Gen 1s, but it's it's over 12 volts.
Yeah, it's not like anything crazy sensor in those deals.
It's all digital. Yeah.
It's interesting. So in the car though, modules that you have have your Ford ECU. Didn't they make those for like the factory stock guys and like the Copo stuff? Didn't they kind of come out with that for like body and white stuff? And
Coyote stock for NMRA. They have like set computers for all the NA Coyotes, and
I think they flash them before every pass too. They make sure that you're still.
It's all similar. It's same ECU, just different.
The only thing they do is like they can tighten they can do their fuel pressure. I think is like pretty much it.
You can change your intake, or you could, but now maybe it's like specified intakes, and now they're like pre-calibrating the MAF for that specific intake, which they weren't doing. So guys would like, the tune was for a stock airbox, and these guys were throwing on big tubes, and the fueling would be all jacked up, and then they were skewing the IAT sensor. There's like every year they like tighten it.
Does that class sound fun to you at all?
I'm like, from a data standpoint, it'd be fun to like try to hack around stuff, but I think it's so tight now they don't allow it. So it's like, I'm like, nah.
I would like to see that class in like drifting. I feel like that would be the only time it would be interesting, because then it just takes like money out of the equation a little bit, where you can only do chassis.
Yeah.
But in drag racing, because you're just going to do the same freaking thing every time over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I can't handle that.
I like the Outlaw cars. So I had a few guys that run that class all year, and then they'll go to World Cup. I actually had one this year. He hits us up. He's like, hey, you interested in tuning this? I'm like, you know what? Sure.
Because they have an all-motor class at World Cup.
Yeah, and he can run a different fuel and then show up.
Tune the ECU.
Yeah, he can pull 200 pounds out of the car, and then we can pick up like 20 horsepower. Because it's got race fuel. Well, you can add timing, so it can pick up a little bit of power here and there. So I had one car go 930s, I think, at 142, somewhere around there.
That's pretty stout, though.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quick. It would be fun if they still allowed the exotic fuel for it, but I think they killed that this year.
They usually do like a big ass wheelie too.
Yeah.
I don't know the concept behind that. I guess it's just how those cars have to work.
It's crazy gearing that they have. I think this car that I was tuning, it had an issue where he'd come off the two-step and it would like overfuel on the factory or the Ford tune. So we did some tweaks and I got it to not do that. And he had to tame his wheelie down big time because it like almost put on the bumper with a 1.2 something 60 foot because it had more torque. Yeah. So they're interesting. That's the range I was talking about earlier. Yeah. Like, I don't mind the NA stuff, and like, I'm a closet NA guy, I guess you could say. All the guys at the shop would make fun of me for saying that, but I love like trying to push the engine in a certain trim beyond where it typically is. So like a 600 horse NA Coyote to the tire is kind of cool, like on ethanol, not on some exotic fuel. We have tuned a couple that are on like M1 or M5, but you got to have a fuel system in it for 1,300 horsepower. Yeah, because of how much fuel it's.
And also, like 600 horsepower should be just like a true street car.
Yeah.
So once you put a fuel that's like that in a street car, that's that volatile and that like dangerous.
Yeah.
To me, it ruins a lot of like the street car when you have to like. Because you should be in a 20-layer suit when you're driving around in a car.
You're not
with
wrong.
M5 in it.
You're not wrong.
That's a dangerous fuel. You can't see it when it's on fire.
Right.
It's like scary stuff, M1 and M5. Like people, I see people do that all the time. They're just like, in the GM world, they'll put M1 in their the windshield wiper reservoirs, and then spray it. And I'm like, I get that it's close enough to windshield wiper fluid, but it's still like you just put it in the crash zone.
Yeah.
It's like
I mean, sometimes it's inside a frame rail, but I understand.
Yeah, it's questionable.
I can't say that I haven't done it.
I'm sure it happens in the Coyote world too, especially with blower cars. They make all the heat in the world.
Yeah.
And I was we were talking about blowers before and fuel. I was with a couple of blower guys and they just like the fuel that they just spray in there is just all of it.
Yeah.
Like this weekend we were talking about burnout stuff, and they're just like, yeah, it's just dumping fuel in at that point.
That's on the mechanical fuel injected stuff?
They're not technically mechanical, all of them. A lot of them are EFI now.
Okay.
But they use like this, there's like this box that has 6 injectors in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the bottom of the injectors has a bunch of lines that go to the blower.
Okay.
So you're basically just using 6 injectors and spraying, or 12 injectors and spraying.
It's like remote. It's like remote EFI.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remote, I was like, direct mechanical.
Why not
EFI?
just put it
yeah.
there instead of use?
Must be heat. Something with heat.
Yeah, I don't know what the thought is. I think it's more just because at that point you don't care about the pulse of cylinders because you're putting it on top of the blower.
Yeah.
So you're just spraying.
So they're just spraying. They're not even spraying into the runner. They're just spraying right into the supercharger.
They spray on the hat and then they spray under the hat, under the blower.
Gotcha.
So they spray in 2 different spots.
Okay.
Just a lot of methanol.
Yeah, but it's burnout car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
15 gallons for like a minute.
Wow. Yeah. 1 RPM and maybe a little modulation, right?
Very little.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep it off the limiter.
Yeah. Yeah. Engines don't like limiters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like hearing the limiters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially on an LS car.
Yeah.
If a Coyote goes out there and does a burnout on the limiter, it's not going to be fun for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to keep it just off of it a little bit.
That's why when I saw they put a Coyote in that Crown Vic, I was like, I told Garrett, be very careful with how you set that limiter up because it's not going to like it.
Yeah, I think it's already not liking it.
Oh boy, oh boy.
But that's a conversation Garrett probably tell us about. So your business is, what is it, 98% remote tunes? Sending things out?
Basically, yeah. It's we have a dyno. It's for R&D, in-house stuff only. Sometimes if we need a car for an extended period, we'll have somebody ship it to us. Just depends on what it's for. Like I try to do everything as remote as I can because it is more convenient for me. If I was a shop and I was only turning out tuning in-person cars, I think that it would be a very small percent of the volume that we're able to do now. So it's easier for our market, it's just like most of it's bolt-ons, even all the way up to putting a turbo kit on, right? So it's technically a bolt-on.
I know. I posted about this recently. Because I asked, I was like, is the R8 kits bolt-on?
Yeah.
And it kind of is. Now, especially these Coyote kits, that's bolt-on.
Yeah.
You don't cut anything, you don't modify anything, move anything. It's a gray area.
And the supercharger kits are very consistent. So like we have base files for a lot of things. And we're able to generate a tune. I say generate, we're the ones, piecing it together, but we have pre-configured files and we can put your injectors, the right MAF, because it's obviously MAF-based still. And depending on what pipe you have, a 3.5-inch charge pipe for the most part is going to tune the same across a lot of different turbo systems.
Yeah.
Just depends on how it's oriented. But we have everything categorized so that we can ship it out and it's within a few percent right out the gate. So our time to review a log is cut down, and then it's just them data log. I think the most time consuming part now is helping a customer through loading the tune and data logging. It's not so much like the actual tuning.
You don't just have like a video you send them for that?
We try. I mean, it's a lot of it, like the HP Tuners has the TDN, which allows you to use your phone to flash and data log, which is convenient.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
When the Bluetooth is functioning properly, it's good. Otherwise, some of it is like it turns into IT stuff. So we were talking about the NGAUGE before we went live, but the NGAUGE had that unique ability to just like save steps so that someone had like a tangible product where they could touch the screen. And it's just like, tuning, flash the tune, and then it's just all intuitive. And not having that product anymore in the market really, it's tougher on the customer, I think. So I feel a little bad, like that, there's not something else that's able to be out there that can compete with it, that
and
we're
you
able
could
to
hold
use.
a bunch of tunes in it too, so you could kind of have like a library. And I'm sure there's tons of customers that still use this every day, but like you can have like your streetcar 93, then switch to ethanol, switch to...
Yeah, you have your 93 tune, E85 tune, your Ghost Cam tune.
Because those cars, is it factory ethanol? Like, do they have flex fuel sensors?
They don't have flex fuel sensors, but they have flex fuel logic on the F-150s, and you can turn it on in the Mustangs. It works okay. It's not like super accurate because it's better for naturally aspirated stuff where like there's not something that can skew the airflow in the intake, like on a blow through setup where you have like a turbocharger pushing pressure or a supercharger from a centrifugal versus a draw through like a NA combo. It can skew it. So we don't do it for boosted applications. And we actually, we used to do flex fuel a lot where we would give them 3 tunes, a 93 flex fuel, we call it a convenience tune, and then a dedicated E85 tune. A lot of guys won't follow the learn process properly though. So it'll have ethanol in the tank and it learns to E60 because they just didn't drive it. So we kind of pulled back on it a little bit. We're working with a company in Australia called PCMtech, and they are able to manipulate the factory ECU, Gen 2, Gen 3 ECUs, where they can load a section of the tune and you can select tunes on the fly, so from your steering wheel. And they set up what's called user adjustable flex, where you can go in and it uses the speedometer side because that's got more numbers. And from 0 to 85, you can go select what ethanol percent you have.
And you do that while you're driving? On the fly? On the fly stopped?
I disable that part so they can't do it while they're driving. Key on, engine off only. But yes, if I enabled it, you could manipulate the Stoich and the tune on the fly. But
seems a little questionable to try to do.
Well, it was the first step to do can-based flex fuel. So now we haven't released anything yet, but it's we were testing it, and now we're working on a little bit of a plug-and-play solution. You have a flex fuel sensor, you have a CAN bus solution, flex sensor connects to it, and then the CAN bus connects to the OEM CAN, and it sends your flex percent from the sensor over the CAN, and they have in the tune or the logic to listen on that CAN address and then send it to that same logic, and it'll adjust the ethanol percent on the fly.
Yeah, so it's one of those return system. You just kind of put it in place.
Yeah, like
sensor.
what Motion Raceworks sells.
Yeah, like a Continental sensor.
Yeah, and it's all the GM sensors, and then it just connects to this little box, and it's not going to be cheap. And someone with a return fuel system is going to have to, hose it themselves, plumb it all. But it works.
Because that's what I have on my CTSV, and I could just put any amount of ethanol I want in there, and it just does it for me. I don't have to think about it. I don't mess with the tune, nothing. You just, whatever you got.
Yeah, and everything's set up right on your 93 side and your E85 side.
Yeah, so and it blends automatically in the ECU. It's pretty dummy proof, which is perfect.
So they set this up to function the same way, to be pretty much idiot proof. And in our side, when we set up what they call it the MultiTune, it's the PCMtech MultiTune. It'll blend automatically based on what it's seeing. So
why is it Australia? What did they get a lot of Coyotes and 6R80s?
They started with Falcons,
so they did get Coyote 5.0s.
Yeah, okay. Which I think they're like a lock. One of the cams is not functional VCT, I think. So
that's weird.
Yeah, so they started with that, and they have that ZF trans, which is similar to the 6R. So they're very familiar with heavy cars trying to push a lot of power. So yeah, I don't know why the Australians.
It seems like a weird, because they didn't get Mustangs really.
Yeah.
Maybe a few that are over there now, but I don't think they ever got a mass-produced Mustang.
They have some over there, and we've tuned a lot of Australian Mustangs. But this product, we reached out to them back. They didn't even have anything in the U.S., and we said, we want to work with you guys because this is a neat feature to be able to market this. And we have a lot of customers that buy it, and we can do not just that. It's right now, currently, we can do, you can switch the tune on the fly. So a lot of guys that like Ghost Cam idle, they can be sitting there normal idle and switch their tune on the fly, and it'll switch to the Lopi idle in milliseconds. So it works really well for that
be
market.
that guy.
Yeah.
Pull up to the car, show you, switch your idle.
Yeah, and if it starts driving bad, you can switch it back.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. Like some guys don't want to have to flash the tune because it takes minutes out of your day.
It's a lot, It's just tough.
Yeah, the race car side of it though, you can adjust timing on the fly. So like in a blower car, if you want to have a timing ramp,
Yeah.
with that same blending logic that it's using for the Stoich, you can set it up to be only timing. So I can have a timing at 0% and then a timing at 100%. So 0% would be, a 12-degree ramp, but 100% would be full timing.
I feel like I would just want like a burnout mode if I was a blower guy, just so it's a little lighter on things.
Yeah, there's a momentary button that you can set up, and you can do a limiter on it, but the way Ford's limiter is, it's like fuel cut, so it's like hard to do a fuel cut limiter with a blower. You can kind of do a throttle one, but then it oscillates, which I guess is better than hitting the actual limiter.
Yeah, in a blower car, I mean, you're going to be hard on belts if you do that.
It'll just surge the throttle a little bit. So, like, we've had some guys use it. Yeah, and there's no TransBrake stuff yet. We're starting to work on that, but
For the
6R and 10R, yeah.
How do you modulate? How do you deal with TransBrake then on your car?
It's a box.
Is it drive-by-wire?
It is still drive-by-wire. Yeah, that's one thing I haven't really talked about on that car. Like a lot of guys end up going to standalone because cable throttle because they have issues with drive-by-wire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still
Issues or not, I just like knowing when I plant my foot.
Yeah.
It's gonna plant it's opening.
Yeah, I mean
really no question.
That part we've never had a problem with. GTR guys, they still most of them run drive-by-wire on both throttles.
Yeah, and the tiny little throttle bodies.
Tiny little throttle bodies. The main issue that drive-by-wire has, at least on the Ford side, isn't so much how quickly it opens or anything. It's harmonic related. So when you're at that power level, or you have a blower, and it's everything's a tuning fork at that point, the throttle motor, sees those harmonics, and you're at 8,000 RPM. It starts making that tinging, and the little magnets can't keep up. And if you monitor the duty cycle on the throttle motor, it's pegging, trying to keep the blade open. Eventually, it gets to 100%, and then it'll shut the throttle. And then you'll have throttle chop going down the track. And we had that issue probably a few years ago, and it was very frustrating. We tried spacers. Sometimes they help, like hard rubber spacers.
Yeah.
But then I was talking to a few guys, and Nick Williams, I'm sure you've heard of him.
Yeah.
He makes the throttles now with a beefed up throttle motor. So it's physically bigger. And I hit him up and said, can you because he makes the 103 throttle we have on there. It's from an Eldebrock kit, funny enough. And he makes that one. And I said, can you make one with this bigger throttle motor? And he said, yeah, I think I can. And sent us an invoice. And I said, okay, we'll try it out. And I haven't had an issue since. So we're buzzing 9,300 RPM.
So 103 throttle body on that?
103, yeah. We don't need that big.
Yeah.
It's just that's the one we happen to.
I see it on blower cars that size. I get that. But turbo cars.
Blower cars have like 130 plus. Yeah, they're big.
Well, some of the Ford stuff is like this big oval, and it's kind of weird, and it's like annoying to make intakes for and stuff.
They're starting to get away from it, I think.
That's convenient.
Yeah, the ovals, like, we're having issues with like blade and shaft flex, which can cause sticking. And then, the tuner gets blamed because your throttle's not functioning when it's just the throttle not functioning. So, but yeah, that it has that on there. I don't see a reason to get rid of it yet. So, because we haven't had it stick open.
Yeah,
if
it's not causing issues. Yeah, no need to really bother with it. It's interesting you talk about motor harmonics a lot because most people don't, and I feel like a lot of people don't realize. I've listened to some people talk about it, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, is harmonics will just kill a motor.
Oh, yeah.
So easily, and a lot of engine builders and stuff don't realize that. Yeah. I'm sure most of them do, but I haven't heard many people talk about it.
Yeah, it's all about balance. So if everything's balanced, just from rotating assembly all the way to, how your turbos are mounted, like everything it's in synergy. So you have to be mindful of that. Like, that's why we're always pushing people to get the right injectors and not some clapped out injector they find on eBay, because even when the fuel is being sprayed,
they're all Bosch 210s.
Yeah, right.
Every injector out there is a Bosch 210.
But it's all about that. So, and then Joe at FFRE really prides himself on that portion of the engine. So when we came to him for the motor in that car, he's like, well, what do you want to do? And we said, well, we like what that guy's doing over there, Brett. Mm-hmm. It's a different setup, but we want to push the same power level, whether we're doing it through this transmission or another one. And he said, well, here you go.
Yeah, I mean, he has the formula. There's no question. I mean, he was just on not too long ago from this episode.
Yeah, I watched it the other
2 days ago. Yeah. But, I mean, he's just next level on how he knows those coyotes. It's like unreal.
Yeah.
And that's why I always try to point people to him as best I can, because he may not he's not like a big marketing guy or anything like that. He just makes good products. They are in the winner circle almost every weekend, it seems like.
Yeah.
I think at World Cup, out of 8 classes, 2 of the classes were won by an FFRE engine.
Yeah, which is impressive.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Like that, statistics alone, mathematically, that is a very high chance of success on an FFRE engine.
Yeah, and I like we've been through a lot of engine builders, and there's some that we're like our previous one we're still friends with. So he was up in Pennsylvania, and we moved down here, and it's just more convenient to be local. Like
we can 20 miles from him.
Yeah, 40-minute drive. So it's and Joe likes that relationship with us. Like he approached us at FL2K. We didn't approach him. So most people don't know that. A lot happened at FL2K last year.
Yeah.
And he just said, I want to work with you guys because you tune the majority of my engines because they're in factory ECU cars. Mm-hmm. So he wants to learn how we do things. He wants to help us improve, and we want to help him improve. And that's how it started. He thinks the same way I do about things. Like he was on here, you said 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And he said something about most guys don't think about things in slow motion, I think is what he said, or like they slow things down to process. Like when you're talking about looking at logs remotely and looking at the data, I think, people can visualize things. Like when I look at a data log and when he looks at a data log, he's probably like thinking about how the engine's rotating. Like that's how I think. So some tuners don't think like that. They see the numbers, they just chuck in the correction that it needs, send it down the track. I'm like thinking about where the piston is and what the valve is doing, and just in that small blip on the racetrack or on the dyno. And I try to tell my guys at the shop, like, when you tune things, you have to think this way, because that we're looking at things in millisecond view.
Yeah.
And that's, it's, if you don't think that way, that's how stuff gets overlooked. So
because 10 feet on a racetrack could make or break your win.
Correct.
One little hiccup in a 10-foot section on the track where it went lean pop for 1 second or something stupid, that's it. That could be on the trailer.
Right.
And you guys have to be pretty responsible for that. And everything always falls back on the tuner.
Yeah, right. So we have to be able to defend ourselves and know what we're looking at and be able to explain it mechanically. But yeah.
Huh, that's interesting, because it's tough because everything always falls back on the tuner, and you guys have to kind of persevere through that. And how much do you talk, like a customer, when do they normally call you? Do they call you, okay, I built this whole car, here's my list of parts, or I'm going to build this whole car? When do you prefer they get with you?
I prefer that they get with us, and we don't, funny you mentioned calling, we don't take phone calls. So I want it all written down, documented, because it's a good chain of custody.
I agree with that. I always try to send messages more than I like calling people, but it's nice to just have like a nice...
It's easier to go back and hit Control F and search for it. So I prefer that they reach out to us before they buy anything. And I tell guys all the time after they've made the mistake, like, next time, please contact, like, don't be afraid to reach out to us. Like in your, like, we use a ticket system, hit us up in the ticket. You can talk to a tuner, or you can talk to one of the customer service guys. tell us what you want to do. Let us tell you what you should do. And then comes the battle of, them fighting, because you're not giving them the answer that they want.
They already have the idea in their head of what they want. Well, I tell people this all the time. They'll be like, what ECU should I run? And I'm like, who's going to tune it?
Right.
Ask your tuner.
Yeah.
You got to start from who's going to be the guy on the keyboard.
Yeah.
Don't work the wrong direction here.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that comes down to engine builder too. They always ask who do you recommend? And it's more about goals, because Joe is not selling direct for Coyotes. I think he's pushing people through Real Street right now. Which I think
Fat House sells.
Fat House
engines.
does.
Yeah.
He has something with the code reds. But I like that. I like that he's not taking on every single Coyote build that comes through. There's some guys that we've recommended that he's going to take care of, but they're longtime customers or
big power build, something very unique.
Yeah. But he doesn't do NA stuff. He's specific towards a certain type of engine, and you go to his machine shop and it's he has everything there.
Yeah.
And that, back to the whole engine.
There's a McLaren engine there.
Right.
Last time I was there.
He's doing all sorts of, exotic stuff. But I like that he's in all that, and the machine shop is there. A lot of the engine builders we've dealt with, they outsource. So they don't have their own. They may be buddies with their
somebody
machine
puts
shop
the
guy.
sleeve in, then you give me the motor, and I'll put the rest of it.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think that that works, if you have a good relationship. But he's doing it all there. And when we before we even paid him a dime, it was come to my shop and walk around. And my dad and I were there, and we're just you do all this here? He's everything, and he hand ports the heads. Who does that anymore? Everybody's pushing their CNC programs, and some of those are not working well because they take too much out of the head, and then you cause cracking. And
they flow really well to begin with too, so it's tough to convince somebody to take a bunch of material out of a head.
Yeah, it's my
2J's unported. It's a factory cast, as cast cylinder head, and it makes 1,500 horsepower, which granted is half your engine makes, but it's also 3 liter. So
our 350 heads are they're not ported; they're just polished, and
cleaned
smooth,
up a little bit.
But they look awesome.
Just to kind of get that fuel to not really stick to it as much. It kind of gets it to go down.
Yeah, you're just getting peak flow, as peak as you can get it. So
yeah, that's interesting. What was I going to say? I had something for that. On the Coyote deal, this channel is now a Coyote channel.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
It's completely become a Ford channel at this point, even though I don't own anything that's Ford besides an Sn95 that has an LS in it, which is the closest I have to being a Ford guy, even though I race with a bunch of Ford guys that like to give me shit for being slow. But that's just part of it. And you tune half the cars that I race with.
Yeah. Yeah,
3 out of the 5.
Yeah, and that's what we'll probably never be in a market where we're tuning anything else really.
Yeah.
And that's kind of Joe. We have our little corner that we stay in, but I like being in a corner because I can see everything.
Yeah.
So
you're in it's a big corner too.
It is.
You're not tuning Volkswagen diesels that there's 8 guys.
Yeah.
It's a big market. It's not it's...
It is, and there's other tuners out there that do a good job, and they're competition. But obviously we have to function in the same
they're all
space.
your tunes stolen, right?
Allegedly.
I think that's just Houston.
there is so much to that I know. At some point in the future, we're probably going to get into, but I can't. There's so many stories because you're in that different. You're in the industry and you're dipping in to the Ford side, and I'm sure it's in every industry. But there's so much bad blood that you don't know about.
You would be surprised how much I actually do know about. Okay. But I'm in the industry, but I'm pretty neutral on most things.
Yeah.
I don't really pick sides, for the most part. I don't really care about drama. I don't really care about all that stuff. It's funny to, poke fun at that stuff.
Yeah.
But in the end of the day, I'm not, it doesn't affect me directly.
Yeah.
And I don't really like make money off of, I don't make money off of selling parts. I don't make money off of like selling tunes. I don't make money off of tire. Like,
Yeah.
so it doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
I just want to see the industry grow is the only thing that affects me. More people at the racetrack, more payouts at racing, more people listening to me talk about race cars.
Well, sometimes bad blood works for racing. So it helps, beef up the rivalry a little bit. But,
it's great.
Yeah.
A little bit of drama.
Yeah, a little bit. We, I think 5 or 6 years ago, I would have been like more of a hot shot with it. And I'd be, ready at the hip. Now I'm kind of like, I don't need to do anything because there's so much that has happened that I just haven't like touched, and it just kind of goes the way it needs to go. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to keep doing that and focus on what we need to focus on, because look at what we did in a few weeks ago. Like it still like hasn't fully set in that we had a car in pieces in a month, put it together, and went to a race that we didn't really want to race. It's not that we didn't want to race, but we didn't intend to like win. And we beat the crap out of a 6R80 and came home, drove on the trailer with a stock computer. Like it's like a pinnacle of that, our little corner. And it like, I'm not saying it to brag. It's just like, it's so
you're
surreal.
Just stating facts.
Yeah. It's just,
so it's like,
it's surreal to be in it, and I don't want to be out of that moment. And I feel like as soon as I focus on, if at any point I focused on something negative that somebody is doing, it would pull me out of the ability to be in that position. So
I feel like you're kind of like me in that way, where it takes a lot to really get you like either way, like super amped up or super mad, or like you're kind of just like, I'm pretty level. Like it takes a lot to get me fired up.
You're probably more level than me. I'm more like the Hulk, where I'm always angry. I just don't show it.
Yeah. Always angry. I get that.
I am.
It's probably just my years of on the internet, where like for the last decade, I've been attacked in comment sections with thousands of comments, and you can't let either bother you.
Yeah. I used to like jump in when people would harp on Lund racing, and then I'm not in any Mustang group like on Facebook. So I used to be in all of them, and I'd see everything on my feed. And then like 2 or 3 years ago, I was like, you know what? I'm done with this. So I hopped out of all of them. I think I'm in one. I think it's the 6R80 like list group, so that I can chime in and post up new time slips, and that's it.
You see, I kind of look at it like I look at like politics. Like I don't get super frustrated on things and get all fired up. I just kind of like, it's entertainment, and I just kind of keep it rolling. Like it's kind of easy that way.
It is.
I grew up like my dad was like, just let things roll off your back. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And I watched him. He had a business his whole life, and people would not pay him and stuff, and he would just be like, all right, it happens.
Yeah.
And I was just like, all right, I guess that's just how life is. Like you just, if you care too much, and it kind of just takes some of the fun out of it, I guess.
It does. There's a time and a place for everything, I think. Like we've got stuff that happens in the background that we don't post about, that, a lot of people would, just to like smear somebody. Yeah. And instead of doing that, we just handle it in private, and it always seems to work itself out.
Does it help that your team has a pretty loud, outspoken member?
Alex.
I like Alex. I do.
Yeah, I love Alex.
He would be the first to say he's loud and outspoken on things.
Yeah, but he does a very good job of he knows the line, and so do I. So he always tells me like it's my job to be that person. And it's not because we say you're that guy. It's just his personality suits it better. So I think that, keeping the Lunds off the internet is what he would say is the best way to do things. So he knows that no matter what, even though he works for us, it always whatever he says is associated back to him. Yeah. And not as he's acting like a blanket or anything, but he's like, the image works better that way. So we're just going to keep doing it that way.
And I think for as loud as he is, he also is well spoken and chooses his words correctly on things. He's not just like completely loose cannon.
Yes.
He actually is like, I guess
he maps out everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
like
there's
he's not
always-
saying anything too crazy.
we call it 6D chess now. It's not 4D or 5D.
That
We're
seems like-
6-dimensional.
So I know you're a tech guy.
Yeah.
What do you think about AI tuning these cars? You probably have more data than anyone, where if
Yeah.
you put it into a system,
Yeah.
it could probably do really well.
So
A smart enough AI system with all your data and tunes in it
yeah,
would probably be pretty unreal.
I-
I'm sure it's already doing it, and you're just kind of hanging out at this point and collecting checks.
I wish.
I don't want to blow up your spot.
We started using a little bit of, it's not AI, it would be automation. We started doing a little bit of that in-house. And
It's more just
then
like a large neural net.
it was more like basically taking everything and putting it into a system where it's more kind of like drop-down related. So you can like pick things quick and it would build a file. I wanted to do it more so that the customer could like do it. So as soon as they order, they get their tune, depending on what it's for. And if we got it really good, it would send base files for like 1,000 horsepower stuff. Like here's your RPM limited base file for your E85 ESS Coyote. It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
As long as all the back end's set up right. That's the hardest part, is like having the database structured to do it. Now, AI, if it's smart enough, could be programmed to
With enough info is really it.
Yeah,
There's probably already one smart enough. It just needs the data points.
it would need the data and the instructions. So,
Yeah.
and that's really like, because the business logic is so complex that you can't like AI uses its internet connectivity to go find instructions. Our data, our business logic is not on the internet. So I don't think AI would be smart enough until it's told what to do to then make it better.
Yeah, you would still have to it would almost ask you questions.
It would.
Like where it could do it, but then it would like ask you things.
Yeah.
And it would probably have some good questions to ask along those same lines. Like, hey, it's doing this, AFRs are this is.
Yeah.
And you would just have to like answer things.
Yeah.
Instead of like actually go through. And so you're saying that it would almost send somebody a tune back. And my first thought was you'd probably have to delay it because people wouldn't trust it.
We were talking about that.
Like you'd have to
internally.
like delay it like 2 hours,
Yeah.
an hour,
Yep.
something like that, because the coin machines, at like Walmart,
Yeah.
they delay them because people didn't trust the answer. They're like really quick at counting,
Yeah.
but they actually put a 30-second delay in there because people didn't trust the number because it was too quick.
That makes sense.
And
Yeah.
it would have to be the same thing with your tune.
Yeah, we talked about that internally when we were working on it. It didn't come to fruition because we ran into like some staffing issues to make it happen. So I just put it on hold. But more so, we need like a tuning company, a company that makes the data, like mapping for the tunes, involved in it to do it correctly, because it needs like some API connection with a web form. And I guess if you throw AI in the mix, I would need somebody smarter to handle that. But
It's a complicated system at that point.
I talked about the delay for the same reason. I'm like, someone's going to see this and say, because we already send the tunes pretty quickly, and sometimes we finish the tunes too quickly, and people are like, it was only 2 tune revisions. And we're like, well, that's all it needed. Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with it?
You almost need to drag it out a little bit. Just
like do some, placebo tunes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm letting the car cool down. You look in there, your tuner's just playing Tetris or something.
Yeah. Change one thing and then change it back and have 4 tune revisions.
Well, like my tuner Alpha, he'll be up there tuning a car, or like when he was tuning my car, I went up there and like I look in the window, I'm like, oh, how's it going? And he's on a different car, remoted in, letting my car just like cool down or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're just like tuning 3 cars at the same time. It's not like, I get it. You gotta let it cool off. But like, it was just funny to see him like, I was like, wait, that's Motec. I don't have.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You're not even plugged in.
Man, yeah, I don't know if I could do that in person. I think I've tried to, where I'm tuning in person, and then someone sends me an email and I go check their log.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he is technically AI because it's alpha induction performance. So
okay.
I already consider it AI tuning because he'll be tuning like 14 cars at the same time on different windows, I think.
Yeah.
And just swapping. I always tell people I don't know anything about tuning. I'm not a tuner. I don't know what I'm talking about with this stuff. I just have a
good understanding of it.
A good enough understanding of it to talk to tuners, I guess, because I've had to ask enough tuners questions to.
That's fine. That's good though. I mean, you have to, like the MSR guys, they all, Christian, Mike and Mike, they look at their own logs. So I don't need to, like, when they want to go to the track at 9 o'clock at night, I don't mind being available if they ask. But
Friday, Saturday,
they know they don't, like, I have a family, they don't want to bother, but they know what to look for. So it's like I educated them a little bit, but they just kind of knew. And if there's an issue, because the car's running great, it's been running great for months, if it leans out, they don't go, John, you need to make a tune change. They're like, something's mechanically wrong. Yeah. And
tunes just don't expire.
Correct. Or go stale like bread.
I thought 6 months and they just like went bad.
Yeah. Believe it or not, a lot of people think they go stale. So like all of a sudden the next year you need a new tune fresh up because the computer just gets moldy.
Well, that's the flip side of it too, is like people that race, like if you're racing your car, if you're trying to be competitive with your car, you really have to have an understanding of mechanical and tuning stuff. You can't just like fully rely on your tuner, especially if you don't have any sensors. Like, you know, these guys, they don't have EGTs, they don't have all kinds of stuff where you can really pinpoint issues.
Right.
Even a car at a track should technically have like shock sensors and things like that for the chassis side of things, but most of us, we don't have that. We just use slow-mo video.
Yeah, and that's that argument about like stock computer versus standalone, because obviously we don't have a standalone and we do have those sensors. And standalones don't have all the inputs to take those sensors usually. Like even an M150 is still going to need they use a wideband over CAN bus, so there's no direct wideband on it. Factory ECU has direct O2 sensors. Fuel Tech is wideband over CAN. So you're still buying the ECU and a bunch of like modules. So like it's not, you still have to like input all the sensors. So standalone stuff doesn't really like give you that whole, like it gives you an advantage for certain areas, but not for monitoring. Maybe safeties. But let's be honest, everybody shuts the safeties off. Maybe not in testing, but a lot of the safeties get shut off.
Yeah, you kind of have to. If you're going into round 1 or 2, you know, can't have a safety taking you out.
I hear that argument all the time. Like, I want a standalone for the safeties. And I'm like, the safeties you're going to disable right after, you know, you get into eliminations?
Yeah, you need like a switch.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. And no, you're going to do it because you're going to want to win. So, you know, that's how it works. But
if like an oil pressure safety takes you out, it's a bad deal.
Yeah, because you could, if it's only going to drop 10 psi, it's probably not going to hurt anything too bad. You know,
you guys have high oil pressure to begin with.
Yeah.
LSs are like 30.
Yeah,
if you're lucky. Yeah, and then drop to like 20.
But factory computers, ours doesn't have an oil pressure safety factory, but the Gen 3s do. So if it drops below a certain threshold, because all the Gen 3 Coyotes come with oil pressure sensors, and they have that logic built in. It'll do a RPM limit, and I've had it happen to a car. It probably saved it from being a really bad day. So it's not that the factory stuff doesn't come with it. I think where like standalones gain their benefit is like what we were talking about with the coil. You know, being able to run a bigger energy coil like the IGN-1As on a Motec. I don't think I could get one to work with a factory computer. So that would be a benefit if I ever need it. Dual injectors. Like, I don't know how I'd ever get it to work on a factory computer. There's no injector driver to hack into.
Yeah, there's no second injector driver.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing some daisy chain thing with, like, using the signal and then using something else to spray the, like, I don't know if we'll ever do that. So that would be when we're, like, standalone time. Otherwise, as long as you have good power management through whatever controller you like, a boost controller, then, you know, you're good to go.
So what's the next milestone for that car? Like, what now it's a 670s, right? What did it go?
679.
679.
Yep.
It's tough to look at that and be like, now what's my next milestone?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it probably went 450s?
444.
444.
Yeah.
So it's tough, like, to make another goal, because obviously 5s are not really,
not at that weight,
not attainable, really.
Yeah.
I don't want to say like never, but it's like, it's a tough one to look at, be like, oh, I want to go 5s now. That's not really the next jump from a 6-second car.
Right. I think it's like with anything. So we went 7.0s a couple times, low 7s a lot. My first goal, my biggest goal at World Cup was we had ran 450s like 20 times, and I wanted to be out of that because I knew that at least if it goes a 440, it'll go a 6. I didn't get there until it went like 680s. I didn't even intend for it to go 680s. It's just like it was responding to boost finally.
Yeah, good air.
Yeah. But the turbos on it and the turbo kit and the engine, we have this range of horsepower now. So when it's 40 pounds of boost now is what I would have had to push the previous setup at 46, 47, and I never even got there. I don't think the turbos would have been able to keep up with it.
What is it on there? 76s or something? Or
as Boost Lab 79s. So they're G42 based, and they're like a Garrett 79.
Local company.
Yeah, they just basically modify it with some lightened stuff and some tweaks here and there.
Cheatered up shit.
I don't think it's too cheatered up, but
up stuff.
I think it's they do stuff to like lightened shaft and all that to help with spool. So our car spools really fast with no dump valve.
Yeah, and I think they do some stuff on the bearing side of things too to make it spin real nice.
Yep. Yeah. So, and the VCT helps with that. But I think like I want to go 430s next in the 8th. The quarter mile, whatever happens. But the trans is at a point now where we know it's like horribly geared and it's not going to work long term for wanting to improve the ET. Because if you look at the data log and you look at the time slip, even our competitors were kind of like making jabs online. You know, these guys that are like, you have a nitrous big block Ford that we beat, that 60 foot's like a mofo, but has no top end. I mean, it did 198. But
as a nitrous car that probably runs 8th mile normally.
Correct. And he's, lighting the candles as long as he can.
Yeah. Watching you guys drive around him.
We had 10 mile an hour on him. So, but the Supras in that class, they were trapping 210, 211.
Yeah, they just can never make it rounds.
Right. So they have a similar back half mentality, but our car can obviously front half as long, because I don't have all the power poured in until like 1.6 seconds.
Okay.
So most of these guys have it in by at least 1 second. Yeah. And I can't do that because of the first gear ratio, even with the 3.0 rear gear, because it'll just want to pick the front end up and do this massive power wheelie to the 330 foot.
By 1.6, are you about to shift out of first, or are you?
It's just after the shift.
Just after the shift.
So I'm short shifting the shift, because if I let first ride out, even with the power it's
What
on.
is short shift?
8,600.
Okay. So short. Wow.
2.3 is at 93. So and it can go higher because it keeping that RPM drop into a higher RPM keeps it further past peak torque, which just helps. It's aluminum rod.
Once you get a motor in peak torque, it's unhappy.
Yeah,
if you keep a motor in peak torque too long, it's gonna tear some shit up.
Right, and peak torque on a Coyote, no matter what you do, it's always 5,500-ish RPM. Yeah. So we're way past it, but our torque curve is really flat. So based on how the RPM or the horsepower carries with RPM. So if I can it wants a shift at 10,000 plus, I don't know if the valve train is going to handle that. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of like, just like Brett, I mean, he's up there at 9,900, probably 10,000 now.
Yeah, I think it saw 10,000 briefly.
Yeah. And we don't know. Like, neither of us knows. He's pushing it further, obviously, and it hasn't broken anything. So it's really just a matter of who's more comfortable with what.
And you guys aren't in competition.
No.
Because you're both using the same engine builder, so all the data ends up going back to Joe.
Well, the engines are literally, besides the cams, everything else in the engine is exactly the same except for the crank. I think he's still on the stock Boss crank. Yeah. And we have our Winberg billet that we had from a previous motor, because he wants to see how the billet crank is going to work, because it works really well with aluminum rods.
Yep.
We don't have any flex though. Like, I know he talks about like the center main, I think, having more flex.
Yeah.
So we know that there could be a problem at some point with the crank just, going away.
So I guess.
But I don't know when that's going to happen.
Back to like goals. How do you set your? I mean, you said 430s.
I think 430s is the best. Like,
because now we're talking like small goals almost.
It's a small
where
goal.
They're less exciting.
Well, like
they're still exciting to you, but they're less exciting like to the broader.
It is less exciting. Yeah, you're right. I think so. Some people think we're taking the 6R out because we did what we needed to do with it. We ran a 6. It's deep in the 6.
Some people are hoping. Yeah. Some people really love to see Turbo 400 in there with a lockup.
Yeah.
Me included.
I don't know if we'll do a lockup. We'll definitely do a 400 at some point. But we have one more thing we're going to test with the 6R80. We've already changed the rear gear on the car to set it up for a 400. So it's a 3.6 rear gear now. We could put a 3.7 in, but we had a 3.6 in the shop. And it's the 9.5-inch Pro Gear, 35 spline. We had a 28 spline 3.0 in it. And that was something else that I didn't say. We pulled it out this past week, and it was already twisting. So we tried to run it at ModNats, and it spun, and it was probably good that it spun because I think if it would have hooked, that could have been that pass that it just, exited the chat.
You might be the only person on a Pro Gear with a 28 spline. That doesn't sound that common because I don't even run a Pro Gear in my car. I run the street gear stuff because it's soft.
Yeah, it was a 3.0. It's a non-pro 3.0 gear.
You said
but no, now we're putting in a Pro Gear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I mean, a lot of us don't run Pro Gears.
Yeah.
And they're hard to get and they're expensive right now, too.
Yeah, they are. So we had collected them already before.
Yeah.
But we had
like 5x'd in price all of a sudden.
Yep. So we had like a treated 28 spline, just normal gear. So it was a little bit stronger than the typical one, but it obviously did what it needed to do. So it's good that we pulled.
What about if we zoom out on the record a little bit and talk about factory automatic overdrive transmissions?
Right.
Because then the broader record, I don't know who would be in that conversation then. If you're not talking about Ford, maybe 4L80s. I don't think any 4L80's been that fast.
I don't think so.
I don't think any 6L80's ever been that fast.
But they have the 4L80 in the rule set is lumped next to the 400. Like in the Street Fighter rules, they weren't. The 4L80 wasn't allowed to use the TX2K streetcar crossover rule, but they put the 6R and 10R in that one. So maybe a goal. Maybe it's not a goal. They're going to definitely move the 6R over, right? I think for me,
you ruined that for you and a couple others.
I ruined it, but it's like a proud dad moment at the same time. Like it'd be cool to see that trans put next to a Turbo 400 in a rule set, even though it's going to kill. Like we won't be able to compete with 6870s with a 6R80. Like at 30, I think we'd have to weigh 3,500 pounds. So, but broad. I mean, it really depends on your argument for what OD is. So, like, our trans is OD based, but we don't have an overdrive in it anymore. So, our OD drum is deleted. So, it's technically a 3-speed. People know that and they hate it because they're like, it's no longer a 6R80, even though it's using the same drums.
Yeah.
So, I still consider it an OD based trans. It's full drum transmission. It doesn't have bands in it like a Glide or 400. It's, that planetary style. So it has a factory Ford planet in the back that controls the gear ratios. The next goal for it is to get something different in the back and then change those ratios. And I've already been working on something. So
that'll be cool. Yeah, because I guess then I don't know who it would be. Maybe somebody can enlighten me on who has the fastest true overdrive transmission. And maybe the argument would be made it's a stick shift car.
Yeah,
because but if you're saying automatic overdrive trans.
Stick shift cars, well, right. So
but they only use 1 through 4 also. They take out
5 and 6 are gone, so they have no OD.
But somebody like Granis,
they're still T56s.
They could put one in there and still probably break that record pretty quick if they put in like a true.
Yeah, but someone's been 60s with a.
Tick at Grubworm with the white F-body, he went 660, I think.
Yeah, so OD automatic would be the Grey Goose, I think.
I would
OD
probably...
based.
Sometimes I tell people you got to make the claim and then see if people come out of the woodwork and prove you wrong because you're not going to find...
Yeah.
I've still made the claim fastest 6-cylinder Camaro. Nobody's tried to dispute it yet. Still waiting.
I think you have it.
I think I got that one, but
yeah. But AOD is what you would call it. It's the gray car. DCT would be some GTR.
Yeah.
Like 650s, I think, and then stick shift T56 would be, or H pattern.
Yeah.
Because I guess stick shift can now be like a PPG or something. Like they.
It depends on where you race it at.
It's all these micro definitions. So, and I don't like.
That's why I was trying to talk to you about like zooming out a little bit almost to like get out of the Ford world and say all overdrive. Based transmission.
My pride lies within the stock computer. So it is the undisputed fastest, quickest stock computer any vehicle on the planet. I asked some guys that have faster cars, and they have the TCM for dual clutch, but their engine management is Motec or something else. So they already say, we are not part of that category. So as far as what controls the trans and what controls the engine, seeing spark and fuel and doing other things, it controls the engine and keeps it alive and the trans down, for 6.7 seconds. And I think that's it. I can't think of anything.
That's a pretty cool record to have.
That one to me is like the ultimate, and I think we can go quicker. So I personally want to see it go 650s.
Don't you have aren't your customers top 3 also? Like you and Brian Luna and
Brian would have the second quickest. Yeah.
So you guys are kind of all just competing in your own kind of arena at this point.
Well, when we first went 6s with it, he still had the record. And then I told my dad, I'm like, we're going 680s next pass. So
is he still IRS in that car?
Yes.
That's wild too.
Yeah. And it's been I don't know if it did a 110 60 foot. I think it did 111.
Yeah.
So, and we could keep going with it. So that car is super, I think he's going to keep it that way because it's like the identity of the S550 is the IRS. So.
Yeah, but they look so good when you drop them with a solid rear axle.
Yeah, they do.
There's quite a few race car S550s out there that look real good.
Yeah.
And they're lowered down. It's one of the better looking race cars.
Yeah.
I think.
And that's something else that we've been looking at. Do we keep pushing this car to become a chassis car, or do we look for a chassis car and move the power plant over and then wait for something to come for the 6R80, rear planet, gear ratios, and then play with a 400 for a bit?
It doesn't sound like you can just wait for things to happen on that. It seems like you have to do them yourself. You personally are the one that has to actually do it. Because if you just sat and waited for this stuff to happen, I would almost guarantee none of it's happening.
Well, the gear ratio changes we've been pushing for a bit. It's just there's so much that you can't get anybody interested in it. I've asked different transmission gear manufacturers, and they're like, we're not interested in helping. So it's been
they're all so busy with even what they have now. They're all backed up. Cohen and anyone that builds transmission parts, they're not trying to build anything but Turbo 400 parts now because they can't even keep up with what they got.
Right. And I don't fault them for that. You got this little trans that's not really proven anything. And maybe a 400 didn't need to, it had, 50 years? So we're in a decade into it. So maybe we're a little pushing it a little bit on the timeline, but I don't know. So I think that eventually it'll get there. It's just
what's the story on though? No, a stock case. Does that kind of freak you out a little bit?
It does a little bit
because you say you work with Circle D, right?
Yeah, and they just
purchased Reed.
Yeah, I already hit up Chris and said, can we get this on the docket?
Is that going to get the ball rolling on that? Because they already do a 4L80.
Yeah,
it's the GM Reed.
Yeah,
because those trans are pretty much a 400 with overdrive.
Well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did one of those cases explode and then they said we need to build one, or did they just do it preemptively?
Well, I think if you start drag racing a car, you almost need that SFI sticker. So
you're right.
Whether it breaks or not,
bell housing related.
Yeah, you almost you can't really wait for the failure. You almost need to
preempt with the sticker.
Yeah, just do it to have that sticker.
I guess from a converter standpoint and it taking a dump and exploding everywhere, it would be wise to have a beefier bell housing and to do that properly, you would need a new case. So I don't disagree with that.
You can't cut the bell housing off those things?
You can. Like, I know TJZ guys have done it because they have that mod you can do to put a different bell housing on it so it can bolt up to a 2JZ.
Mine just has just like a plate. I just have like a spacer.
For 6R80. Guys have cut the bell housing out a certain way, and they put on this
because mine
SFI
for the
case.
Power Glide is just like I have like this thick ass flex plate, and then I have a spacer motor plate deal. So I just bolt a stock factory GM style bell housing right to the trans, right to the motor.
Right.
But yeah, I forgot that they were doing that whole thing. Powerhouse Racing started doing the 6R80s in 2Js, which is cool because then you get these cruising gears and you can like gear select and all kinds of cool things.
And the trans works really well on them. So that's why, like, if we can get the trans to be in stuff like that, and then a rear planet comes out, ratio changes, it's more favorable for drag racing, stronger. I think it'll push like the envelope on getting stuff like a case done. So I'm more worried about like the rear planet coming apart. I don't know when
the whole thing. I mean, the whole thing's at liberty to come apart.
It is, but it's very strong.
It's a lot of spinning, a lot of movement, a lot of heavy stuff in there.
It is, but it's very, very strong. So it's the only time I've seen one explode is something was installed incorrectly, and I guess when it made a final rotation, it moved something and it basically split the case in half. But it wasn't because of power. It was deemed an installation error. So as long as you pay attention to what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is if they do a different case, they can add things that maybe the aftermarket wants.
Yeah, it'll be
like they can work on TransBrake stuff a little bit differently maybe, or like...
Well, the TransBrake stuff will be
get some kind of plunger in there, like a factory, like a 400 or something.
It's all solenoid because it's different than a 400 being manual valve body. This is has solenoid, so it's technically digital valve body, and I think it's always going to have to stay that way. Someone asked me, like, do you ever think a manual valve body will come out? I said, I don't think so. It's a pretty complicated valve body to make that work. We're more looking at, like, what can we do to increase converter pressure? Because there could be some power to the tire and charge pressure.
Yeah, if you're not pushing the mains out, then...
Yeah, but its factory is really good. It's like 105 PSI.
Yeah.
So, and we're monitoring all that. So it works very well. We have to do it for the dump valve when we use it. But there's even stuff there, like we have an internal dump on it, but it's technically external because we tap the front pump and we have a line that comes out of the bell housing. Could you internalize that dump valve somehow with a case mod? Probably, so you don't have to run this, braided line out of the bell housing.
That kind of stuff would be nice to add. Yeah. It would, I mean, I'm sure to add a ton of weight and size to it, already a pretty big transmission.
It could be some weight savings in the case material, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Huh. That'll be an interesting thing because I'm sure Circle D, they're pretty well up on their Coyote stuff, so they're probably going to start to think about...
Well, and they make the converters that we use, and they're pretty much the only, like, 6R converter company that's out there, and there's probably more room to improve on that, but it... Really, because we're the only ones pushing this power level, it's really up to us, like you said, to drive that. So if we take a break, is it going to pause that development?
Yeah, I mean, if nobody's knocking on their door to buy it,
right,
a company would be crazy to develop something for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make sense on a financial standpoint because a bell housing isn't just like, or a factory case, whatever case is not just like an easy deal. Like that's like a forging process, like foundries and stuff. Like that's a process.
It is.
And especially if you're talking about changing things from OEM, you're not just duplicating
So that's
OEM.
why it's like some things I think need to happen before that happens, like the ratios. Because people are giving up on the trans because it doesn't have favorable drag racing ratios. So if you can change that, I think it'll pivot the market to have more say.
Personally, the only thing that keeps me away from like things like that is like I just like simple and I like parts being readily available.
Yeah.
I just like I'm a basic person when it comes to it.
Yeah.
I shift my car myself. It doesn't air shift. I like the
right, because you would need a controller for that trans to function properly. Yeah, and no one's gonna go. The only good controller for a 6R is a Motec. So you don't want to go, like guys don't want to go spend the money to do it. So it's like, it's really like that Coyote 6R, truck, whatever market.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the trucks because the truck is such a big market.
Yeah.
Like there's so many guys out there racing those F-150 trucks.
Yeah.
And don't they have like a different firing order or something than the
Gen 2 and Gen 3 do. Yeah.
That's so weird that they did that. Just for more torque?
No, I think it's for harmonics.
Oh, interesting.
More harmonic things.
So
the feel at idle and the big chassis, I think is what it was.
So what did they change on it then? Is it like actually like a different crank?
No, it's the camshafts. The camshafts are a different lobe angle, like where they're positioned. And then when you change the firing order, you have to repin the harness. Mm-hmm. And the tune doesn't dictate it. So, like, I can't say this pin is this in the tune.
Yeah.
It's now, the tune's like a verification.
That seems weird that they did all that.
Yeah, like, we have guys that swap them all the time. They'll put Mustang cams in one, and it's easy for us on our end. But their end, they got a D-pin and pin out. Yeah. But it's basically a 5.4, 5.8 firing order.
That's such a big market, too, because there's probably just as many Coyote trucks as there is Coyote Mustangs.
Yeah. The 6R truck didn't really take off. We've had a few like really quick ones. I think we had one that go 860s.
And then the 10 speed.
Yeah, the 10R kind of took over that.
Nobody really talks about those 10 speeds.
Well, they'll be a few years before they come around. Like, we tune a lot of them. So
yeah, I mean, you tuned both of Garrett's giveaway ones, I think, or the one that he has now.
Yeah.
And the one that he gave away.
Yeah, they're good for a certain power level, and then longevity, like the clutch hold is just not there. Like, hard part-wise, they're great. I haven't broken a planet in one, hard, like no shafts. But maybe that's because the clutches are the fuse. I don't know.
Because Garrett had both of those trucks. The one that he had was blower, all-wheel drive, right?
Yeah, the Whipple. Yep.
And then the other one had too big of a turbo on it.
Well, I first had too small of a turbo. It was causing back pressure problems. I told him that. And then I was like, you're really going to miss the Whipple. And then he tried to put a bigger turbo on. And then he hit me up. He's like, I bought a Whipple.
Overshot it on the turbo size.
Yeah, it was just, it doesn't work well. Twin turbos and trucks on the Coyotes work really good.
And street cars and blowers work really well together.
Yeah, all he wants to do is go nines with it. Yeah. So
a street car with a blower is like, it's pretty perfect. You get to like 800, 900 horsepower. You don't really have to go much farther than that. I tell people this all the time. If you're just going to drive it on the street, just put a freaking blower on it.
Yeah.
They're so good. And there's so many good options for the Coyotes too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like the GM world doesn't have as many.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of options, sometimes too many. People buy the wrong option. And yeah.
Yeah. And then you have belt issues.
Yeah.
You got to get a 14 rib belt to try to keep it on.
Yeah. We have a Whipple 10R at our shop. And it's our 10R development car. So I love the blower on it. It's just easy when you go to the track.
And then you break the crank off of it, right?
Yeah, we have a crank support. But.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of guys do that too, where they're holding their balancer and their front of their snout of their crank and everything.
You got to make sure that balancer's on right, though, and check your bolt.
Yeah, Fast Forward Racing, I think, sells the balancer deals, right? They have the bolt that saves them.
Yeah, yeah.
The crank saver or something.
Yeah, yeah.
A stud saves it versus a bolt. That never really.
I think it's like how it. Or maybe his is a bolt. I can't remember. It's how the bolt fills up in the center of the crank.
Wow, so it's got like a long shoulder.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because I never understood how like a different bolt would somehow help it.
How harmonics play a role.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, man, this was fun. Anything else you need to touch on?
I don't think so.
I mean, we covered a lot of stuff. There was actually one more thing. I wanted to talk about people now starting in tuning and how different that probably is. Because you and your dad, you have a lot of history. Your dad was tuning on carburetors, right?
Yeah.
And still probably knows how to, of course.
Right.
So, like, if you almost don't have that knowledge of, like, the early stuff, getting handed a computer with all these different things almost seems, like, overwhelming. Like, you almost need, like, the basic understanding first.
Yeah, like, so he's been wrenching on cars since he was a teenager, and I think he was everything was analog then, obviously. So that was in the 70s. And I started with carburetors, and then he didn't get into EFI until probably the 90s, but he wasn't really doing much with it until 2003. So he had a Lightning, and then tuned by somebody else, and then he got a 03 Cobra. So he was part of that initial Terminator like takeoff where it got, that was like, I think when Ford's modular engine like really took off.
And he was up in the Northeast at that time?
Yeah, we were in Delaware. And I remember specifically being in the Lightning. It was my first supercharged vehicle I'd ever been in. And I forget how old I was, 14 maybe. And that was the most insane experience. And I still remember the whine of the blower. And that probably is like what kicked it off for me.
Do you know who tuned that thing?
I don't remember. I think it may have been Johnny Lightning at the time. But then he got his 03 Cobra. I think Johnny tuned it. I don't know if you heard of Johnny Lightning.
Sounds familiar, but it's also a pretty cool name to know.
Right. Yeah, I don't remember his last name.
I was gonna say, I wonder if it was like Job and those guys
Weicker,
up that way.
Yeah, it's up. He lives up in Pennsylvania, like Mushroom Farm area.
Well, I'm from Long Island, so I kind of have a decent concept of that area a little bit. Okay. Northeast guys are
Amish area.
Yeah.
So he was tuning it, and then I forget what application came out, but my dad started tinkering. I think SCT Pro Racer came out, where you could like tune things yourself. This was before HP tuners. And he tuned his car himself, went to the track. Someone there had an 03 Cobra. They're like, well, you went really quick. Can you tune my 03 Cobra? And as soon as he tuned one, that's kind of like when it started. And then he was on forums, when forums were popular.
Yeah.
And I was in high school just kind of like helping, seeing all this unfold. He was one of the quicker cars. I think he was one of the first to put an automatic swap in one. So I had a 4R70W in it, and he had a Mach 1 computer controlling everything.
Oh, okay, so he was like innovating always.
Yeah, he was like involved with always doing the psycho stuff that people wanted to skip out on.
Yeah, everybody telling him to stop or cut it out. What are you doing?
There were like turbos weren't a thing then. People were still keeping the blowers and just putting gobs of nitrous on them. He was like doing, turbo stuff then. I forget what turbo kit he had. It may have been, I think it was a single turbo. But it was quick for what it was, mid-tens. And then it just snowballed from there. 05 Mustang came out. He was tuning those. 07 Shelby's came out. The GT500 was big when it first got launched because it had another 5.4 supercharged engine.
Yeah.
And drive-by-wire. So now we're transitioning from that cable throttle to drive-by-wire. The 3-valve stuff, they just blow up all the time. So when the 07 came out, it was like, yes, finally something that'll handle power. And then when the Coyote came out, everything changed. And I think 2010 is when they first came out. 6R80 came out in some of the trucks the year before, I believe. And then they were in the cars. And then I didn't start up with my dad until 2012. So I was working at Godiva as a IT security guy. I was like
chocolate.
Yeah, I was like making sure it was secure.
Yeah.
I was the guy that was basically onboarding everybody.
Yeah.
And like embarking on that career path to be, CISO somewhere at some point. So like today I would be, big wig at a company, I think, if I had kept going down that path. But he said, you want to learn how to tune Mustangs? And I was like, yeah. I kind of do.
Because you're already doing computer stuff, tech
I'm already
stuff,
doing it. Yeah. Like I'm helping them. I understand it. And then he said, I'll show you how to do stuff. And then, you'll help me out. Because it was getting busy. And the rest is history. I didn't really, I knew carburetors. I didn't grow up tweaking on them though. Like I understand how they function to a high level. But I think for someone starting out, it's difficult to just like hop right into it. So like I didn't start out like, tuning 1,000 horsepower cars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's more like understanding what the software does to the vehicle before understanding how to tune a vehicle. And then it's kind of like a circle of both. So you like learn how to adjust something, understand what it does in a tuning aspect, and then, full loop all the time.
Because that was something I talked with Alpha about. I was like, man, like how does like a kid get into this now?
Yeah.
Where like you're almost stepping into like something that you missed out on all the previous knowledge of.
Yeah, right.
Where like, you know, your dad saw it grow from nothing to something, so he has the knowledge of like, I couldn't control really anything to now I can control everything.
Yeah.
Where it's almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
And there's too much going on where I don't know. That's just my outside perspective of what it seems like.
Well, you're not wrong, because like even from tuning EFI on the 03 Cobras, it's cable throttle, and even before that, like the Fox bodies, he was tuning some of those too. We had a 93, we actually had a 91 and then a 93, and it still had the factory computer in it from 1993, and the A9L is the strategy code for it. It's like popular for Mustang guys that remember. So when they're listening, they're probably going to cheer. But he was using what was called a tweaker to tune that. Didn't have a wideband, so you have to like integrate it in, and it's just open loop tuning, and it has a IAC on it, so idle air control. You could still adjust everything with a screw. So he graduated from that all the way to drive-by-wire, and I think drive-by-wire is really what complicates things. Is like,
yeah, because once you start getting into like the torque, like their torque management systems on drive-by-wire is crazy complicated.
Yeah.
On like the GM stuff, they use like everything's torque based,
right?
And it's like it's pretty complicated concept to even understand.
Yeah. Their
torque management systems.
Yeah.
And how they control their throttle body. Yep. Based off of torque that the engine's making.
And Ford's very similar. So it's not, there's obviously no torque measurement sensor. So it's all inferred based on airflow or MAP. And MAP isn't airflow, it's just pressure.
So just throwing somebody into that is crazy. It's interesting hearing you also talk about your dad, because I've had Jason Hefner on, and he was talking about Mustangs in the same area at the same time.
Okay.
And he was like, oh yeah, like I had a Coyote in Maryland or not Coyote, but he had a Mustang and Fox bodies up in Maryland that he was drag racing in like the 2000s.
Yeah.
Which is funny to hear the same thing. And then I was also talking to Job Spetter. Him and his dad were tuning Mustangs in the same area at the same time. So it's almost like this one spot in the country was like this Mustang hot rodding capital.
Yeah, Cecil County was where we would drag race, so I'm sure we were probably at the track at some point, at the same time, because Yellow Bullet, goes back. I remember going there just as a teenager, watching.
And then the forum from Yellow Bullet that evolved was pretty much
that's where like
the
all
go-to.
all big time class racers go. So yeah, we're kind of in that. I don't know where we're at. we went to World Cup and raced class racers. So
yeah, you beat a few class racers.
We beat a few. So I don't know where we're at. We're still testing tuners and look down upon a little bit. But
well, man, we'll wrap it up here. Guys, check out Lund Racing for tuning. I'm sure your business has ballooned a little bit since winning World Cup. I'm sure that bumped your emails up a little bit.
It's just a steady time of year, so we appreciate everything all the support. So
well, good deal, man. Next time you come on, maybe we'll get your dad on too. For
sure, he'd like that.
He seems like he's got some stories.
Oh yeah, he's got plenty of stories.
So, good deal, man. Congrats on the win at World Cup. Check out Lund Racing across the board on all kinds of different things. Maybe they'll make some YouTube videos at some point.
I need time.
All right, man. That'll do it. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.